I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News, and it's shaping up to be a barnstormer of a show, ladies and gents. So here's what I've got right at the top, that big breaking news. Andrew Bridgen has been booted out of the Conservative Party for his comments over vaccines and, crucially, the Holocaust. I am due to interview Andrew Bridgen very, very shortly, so don't miss that. In other news, that first flight back from Sudan has now touched down on British soil. I'm hoping to interview someone, again, in a matter of minutes, who's just stepped off that plane, but also ask the bigger question. Do we have a moral obligation to take Sudanese refugees, or are we already taking in enough people? Elsewhere as well, who would want to be a copper? So, the government has hit its target, allegedly, of 20,000 new recruits. But in this day and age, is it actually a good job to have? And what would it look like if we did indeed defund the police? Now, are you also planning a little picnic to celebrate the coronation? Well, if you are, genuinely, you might need planning permission. Talk about NIMBYism from your local council at its best. You want to have a picnic in your local park. Believe you me, you might need planning permission to be able to do that. I've got much, much more coming your way as well. Do not miss it. Patrick Christys, GB News. Just a flavour of some of the other things as well. Should nurses wear body cameras? That's been floated around as well. So GBviews at gbnews.uk. Do we have a moral obligation to take in Sudanese refugees, or are we already doing enough, do you think? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Now, though, headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you very much and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The first flight carrying British nationals from Sudan has now landed in the UK. The aircraft arrived at Stansted Airport in the last half an hour or so. The Home Secretary says up to 300 people have been evacuated from Sudan. It's estimated around 4,000 Britons were stuck in the country. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the ceasefire ends. While at PMQs this afternoon, Rishi Sunak was asked by the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn to outline a safe and legal route available to a child refugee fleeing Sudan.
Priority in Sudan, first and foremost, was to evacuate our diplomats and their families, which I'm very pleased we were one of the first countries to be able to do, Mr. Speaker. And since yesterday, we've been conducting a large-scale evacuation of British nationals. We have some of the largest numbers of British nationals on the ground, and rightly, and I'm sure the whole House will agree with me, that it is reasonable, legal and fair to prioritise those most vulnerable families, particularly those with elderly people in them, medical conditions, but also children, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're in the process of doing, and I pay tribute to all those who are making it possible.
Roseanne Ahmed, one of the Britons who was forced to make her own way out of Sudan, spoke to us earlier today about her journey.
It isn't easy, it isn't safe, it's a massive, massive risk to go out on the streets and drive and attempt to move in the midst of war. And it's also not cheap, it's very expensive. So it was a harrowing journey.
MP Andrew Bridgen has been expelled from the Conservative Party. It's after he compared COVID-19 vaccines to the Holocaust and was found to have breached lobbying rules. The North West Leicestershire MP was expelled on the 12th of April following the recommendation of a disciplinary panel and was given 28 days to appeal. He said he'll stand again at the next election whilst hitting out at what he called corruption, collusion and cover-ups in the political system. The leaders of Ukraine and China have held a telephone call for the first time since Russia invaded last year. Chinese state media claimed President Xi Jinping told Volodymyr Zelensky he's prepared to send special representatives to Ukraine to hold peace talks. President Xi is the most powerful world leader to have refrained from denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine and made a state visit to Russia last month. Since February, he's promoted a 12-point peace plan. The Met Police Commissioner has admitted the force hasn't reached its recruitment target, saying they're 1,000 officers light. More than 20,000 new police officers have been hired in England and Wales, but Britain's biggest police force missed its individual target. The ongoing recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. The Prime Minister earlier said that although progress is good, more work is needed. Well, Mr Rowley admits the Met's shortcoming is partly down to the force's current reputation.
I wish we'd hit it, but we haven't.
Why haven't you?
So I think there are a range of factors in this. We have recruited over the last 3 years more than 9,000 officers, which is the most I think ever in such a short period. We haven't hit the target. Obviously, we are striving to maintain the quality. That's really important. I think there are factors which include both. I think the reputation of the organisation at the moment doesn't help recruiting.
A man has been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the 9-year-old last summer. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman was responsible for her murder, claiming he wasn't aware of this when he helped him. He's been sentenced to 22 months in prison. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says an investigation has opened that could see him serve an extra 30 years in prison. Mr Navalny, who's currently serving an 11.5-year sentence, is being investigated on terrorism charges, a move which he calls absurd. This comes after he survived an assassination attempt in 2020 after being poisoned. The Kremlin denies any involvement. And new data reveals the average cost of car insurance is now £107 more expensive than it was 12 months ago. The research from one poll found that the average price of a policy taken out in the first 3 months of this year was £637, the highest since they peaked in 2011. On average, those surveyed were charged £53 more for their renewal price on an existing policy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it is back to Patrick.
Right, let's get cracking, ladies and gents. Let's start with the big breaking news, shall we? And Andrew Bridgen has been kicked out of the Conservative Party after he compared COVID-19 vaccines to the Holocaust. Bridgen was also found to have breached lobbying rules by a disciplinary panel. Now, he says he's been expelled from the party, quotes, under false pretences. Bridgen has been a Tory MP since 2010. He lost the whip in January. Now, it's important to say that a lot of people found what Andrew Bridgen said morally unconscionable. A lot of people found it misguided. A lot of people thought it was freedom of speech and that he shouldn't have lost his job. I will be talking, hopefully, a little bit later on to Andrew Bridgen himself right here on this show, so we can have a chat with him about all of that, can't we? But Bridgen said, my expulsion from the Conservative Party under false pretences only confirms the culture of corruption, collusion and cover-ups which plagues our political system. I have been a vocal critic of the vaccine rollout and the party have been sure to make an example of me. Do you think that's what did for him, ladies and gentlemen? Do you think that it is the fact that he has been a critic of the vaccine? Was it maybe to do with the language that he used as well? GBViews at GBnews.uk. I'm joined now with more on this with our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's right here in the studio. So, Tom, yeah, this news dropped not so long ago, so Bridgen out.
That's right. It's a decision that was not made today, actually. The decision was made over a week ago, in the middle of this month, the 15th of April, when the Conservative Party panel decided to expel Andrew Bridgen. The reason why this story hasn't broken until today, however, is that there is a 28-day reflection period whereby Andrew Bridgen can appeal this decision by the party. And we're still within that period. So it seems like this has leaked out before it was supposed to, because Andrew Bridgen might well be appealing this decision, and that is the due process of the system. Of course, when he lost the whip back in January, he became an independent MP. He wasn't sitting as a Conservative MP, but he retained his membership of the party. That's how these systems work.
So he says, in a nutshell, he's been booted out because he stood up for the vaccine injured, really, and spoke out against what he would say is a cover-up about the side effects of the vaccine. But he did that in quite a specific way, didn't he?
Right. His contention is that he is being silenced on this issue. The Conservative Party, however, say that, number one, comparing the vaccine rollout or the vaccine itself to the Holocaust was grossly irresponsible, something perhaps on a par of what Diane Abbott said over the weekend. One could draw a comparison there. They're both MPs who've lost the whip after perhaps minimising the impact of the Holocaust, although it must be said that Andrew Bridgen says that he was quoting actually someone who was Jewish in regard to that tweet. But I think many people think that that tweet was misjudged. The other half of this, of course, is what many of Andrew Bridgen's former colleagues have said to me is an increasing obsession with this one issue. There's no doubt that there were some people who were injured by the vaccine and they feel very aggrieved. But as a proportion of those who took the vaccine, it's infinitesimally small. And in the eyes of many in the Conservative Party, Andrew Bridgen's focus on this issue, the number of tweets, for example, he has sent on this, the number of the sort of cause célèbre that this has become for him is completely disproportionate and in many ways overemphasises the scale of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, I'm going to emphasise, I'm hoping to speak to Andrew Bridgen within the next hour, so we can put all of this to him, can't we? I imagine, Tom, that he would say he's speaking up for people who are marginalised, who are not given a voice, and that potentially there was a bit of misinformation about the safety about it initially, and maybe he feels as though this is, well, clearly he feels this is the hill he wants to die on.
Well, certainly it seems that way, because he has doubled down on these claims in the previous few months. There have been claims, however, that people have contested that Andrew Bridgen has made on safety and efficacy of the COVID vaccine, and I think it's fair to say that authoritative bodies have said that some of the things that Andrew Bridgen has said have turned out to be false.
All right, Tom, thank you very much. Our Deputy Political Editor there, Tom Harwood. Yes, again, get your views coming in. GBviews at GBnews.uk. Do you think it was morally unconscionable what Andrew Bridgen said about the vaccines in relation to the Holocaust? OK, is that just a really kind of sick parallel to draw? Or is it freedom of speech? Do you think that there is, you know, maybe the Tory party have been a bit heavy-handed with all of this? So, yes, a little bit later on I will be talking to the man himself, fingers crossed. But we'll have loads more on that. Now, though, to the crisis in Sudan. But I want to broaden this out. So we'll talk now, though, about, in the last hour, the first flight carrying British nationals evacuated from the country has just landed, actually, at Stansted Airport. A total of 4 flights carrying 301 people have thus far left Sudan. Another RAF plane was preparing to take off from an airstrip near the capital of Khartoum this afternoon. I'm joined now by GB News' Home and Security Editor, Mark White. So, Mark, look, we know this plane has landed, and we know that people have been getting off that plane, and we are hoping shortly, anyway, to talk to a chap who's just got off that plane. The question has become a little bit of a broader one now. These are British citizens, aren't they? And some people are raising concerns about whether or not we would have a moral obligation to take more refugees from Sudan, and maybe the Home Secretary as well has raised concerns over that.
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that if someone was to come here and claim asylum from Sudan, then they would have a very significant, strong chance of being accepted for asylum. That's different to actually setting up a safe and secure route. There is a safe and secure route for British nationals, and other international countries are doing the same, ensuring that their citizens are safe, that their nationals are out of the country. And that is the first priority for all of these governments. And it may be that further down the road, as we saw with the likes of Ukraine, depending on how the situation worsens in Sudan over the coming days, weeks, months, that they actually do set up some kind of programme giving Sudanese, who are not British nationals, an opportunity to apply for refugee status to come here. That's the way these emergency situations normally operate.
Yeah, no, indeed. And we are going to be keeping you up to date, of course, as more planes presumably come in. As I said, we are just waiting to get clearance from an individual who's just got off that plane, so hopefully we will go to them relatively shortly. But Mark, these are all British citizens who are coming back at the moment, isn't it? As we understand it, there could be about several thousand others that need evacuating as well.
Yeah, there's up to 4,000 British passport holders in Sudan. We're told, actually, that 301 people have been brought out of Sudan so far. Now, not all of them, we understand, are British passport holders, because really it's with these situations it's kind of all hands to the pumps, and in the same way that German or French or other nations will have taken UK nationals out of that country, we will do the same for other passport holders, get them to the West as quickly as possible. For instance, we've had naval vessels from Saudi Arabia making that short journey from the port of Sudan across the Red Sea to Jeddah, and the latest one to arrive had 1,700 people from 50 separate countries, including the UK. So everybody pitches in to help, but yes, the British effort primarily is for British passport holders, and they will form the vast majority of those coming out.
Yeah, and that is a big question that I want to throw over to you today, ladies and gentlemen, because we're going to be going in at the top of every hour, I think, on this, which is that do you feel as though, in light of what's happening in Sudan, we as a nation have a moral obligation to take refugees beyond British citizens? Do you think that we have that moral obligation? I want your views on that. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Mark, just quickly, one more from you, if that's all right. Well, we are mentioning Suella Braverman. She did claim today that asylum seekers who come on small boats are drug dealers and traffickers, and this has caused a huge amount of controversy.
Well, as always with a headline, it doesn't really give a true indication of what the actual comment probably was meant to impart. She, as you know, other government ministers have said over recent months and years, is not saying that everyone coming across the channel is a drug trafficker, is involved in criminality, but certainly a proportion of those coming in small boats are not just drug traffickers, criminals involved in other aspects of criminality, but potentially also are, you know, people that have a security concern over them as well. You know, we know that former members of the Islamic State terror group have been among those who have come across in recent months across the channel as well. So I'm sure that she meant a proportion of those and not all of those.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White, there, our Home and Security Editor, and before him, of course, Tom Harwood on this big story. It really has got going in the inbox about that news about Andrew Bridgen, by the way. whether or not you think that he has been forced out, whether he's been nudged out rather unceremoniously, unfairly in relation to his comments, of course, about the vaccine and comparing it to the worst thing since the Holocaust. Lots of you getting in touch. Says, this is a disgrace, says Jim. And he's been sacked because he exposed the vaccine and the consequences of it. Jim thinks he's a hero. There is obviously a school of thought, Jim, that says that he just shouldn't have used that comparison. He shouldn't have used that comparison, and potentially the numbers when it comes to the vaccine injured are off. That said, at the same time, a lot of people feel as though there is really no representation whatsoever for people who were harmed as a result of taking the vaccine, and that maybe there was elements of coercion in order to take it. So for one group of people, Andrew Bridgen is an absolute hero. For another group of people, he deserves to lose his job. So whichever particular side of the fence you're on, get in touch. That email address at the bottom of the screen there. I will be talking to the man himself very, very shortly. But before the 2019 general election, the Conservatives promised to hire 20,000 police officers by last month. And they've done it. Yes, that's right, reportedly. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says that it's a historic moment for the UK. Provisional Home Office figures published today revealed that a total of 20,951 extra recruits joined police forces in England and Wales. But today, I want to ask, who would actually want to be a police officer? Would you want to be a police officer? They're abused, not trusted by huge sections of the community in many cases, sometimes with good reason, it must be said. They face the constant threat of assault when they're out and about, and it's not like your rank-and-file copper is even paid that much, is it? I am joined now by a chap who's going to give his answers. He's former Met police officer and the author of the book, How to Be a Police Officer. So I tell you, if this guy doesn't have some answers for us, then nobody will, all right? It's Graham Wesson. Graham, thank you very, very much. Now, look, in this day and age, who would want to be a copper? Because from where I'm sitting, you've got your body cam on a lot of the time. If you're not filming yourself, somebody else is filming you. People are walking around with machetes. They're throwing acid around like confetti. Everyone thinks you're probably a racist, sexist, homophobe. Why be a copper?
I don't know. And the book sales have plummeted, so clearly not enough want to. But in all honesty, there are still many people applying to join. And the real truth behind, and again, lies, damn lie statistics. Home Office have put this figure out. All they are doing is replacing the 20,000 police officers they cut in 2010. That doesn't go anywhere near the 20,000 police support staff that were cut from 2010. So effectively, policing has lost about 40 to 50,000 members of staff in the last 12 years. They've now replaced them with 20,000 new officers who have to gain the experience, gain the knowledge of being a police officer, and get used to dealing with everything you've just alluded to in your introduction. It's not easy being a police officer these days. It's a really challenging job. It can be very rewarding, but again, it needs the support of the bosses, the senior leaders, as the case review alluded to, and the politicians. And they need to be paid enough to do the job. Police pay has dropped dramatically in the last...
Talk me through the pay, Graham, because, again, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong here. I've been dealing with non-stop strike Armageddon pretty much every day on this show, so it's easy for me sometimes to get confused with these things. But my understanding is that police can't go on strike, is that right? And what kind of pay are they on?
Without going through all the history of it, I think the last time was a police strike, 1919. Police Federation came into being. They've not been. It's unlawful, illegal to strike. It's unlawful to cause what's called disaffection within the organisation. So you can't even allude to sort of like work to rule, etc., within reason. So there are rules and regulations that stop police officers having the same trade union rights that every other organisation has, every other profession has. Nurses, fire brigade, etc., doctors. We've seen them all recently coming out on strike. Police officers are not allowed to do that, which is why when I was working and serving, that was recognised and acknowledged by the government of the day, which is why the police officers used to get a pay rise that was in line with inflation. That stopped about 12 years ago. Starting pay is around the mid-20,000s. It varies across the country, and clearly London officers get London weighting, London allowance. But again, as you know, it's so expensive to live in London that I taught recruits for 7 years. The majority of my recruits all lived outside London and had to travel in every day for work, and that's still the case.
You know what, Graham, from where I'm sitting, which thankfully is nowhere near the front line of being a police officer, but just looking at it, it does look as though that job has got exponentially more difficult, because I think there's a fundamental lack of respect among especially the young people at the moment. I wonder what your take on it is as well when it comes to things like people shouting about defunding the police and about institutional racism. You've got politicians queuing up now to slam the police force, and I just wonder whether or not actually it is about as difficult as it's ever been to do your job. I would be terrified to even stop and search someone these days, because I think I'd be up on some kind of racism or assault charge if I did so. I mean, is it almost impossible to be a copper?
It's really challenging these days, far more difficult than when I was working. You know, we didn't have to contend with mobile phones and the scrutiny that they are under these days. In some cases, rightly so, but really challenging. You know, the numbers of assaults has increased dramatically on police officers. Didn't happen to the same extent in my time in policing. But because of this lack of respect and maybe this negativity that seems to go through certain parts of society, and dare I say it, some parts of the media as well, against the police, that there's elements of society that just feel that the police are almost like a free target for them. And they're not getting the support in the courts either. When we actually arrest and take these people to court, there's no deterrent, or very few deterrent sentences being imposed by courts. So the whole process needs reviewing and looking at.
No, it does. And I dare say, Graham, as well, that if it was put to a public vote about who in the public sector should be getting the biggest pay rises, I mean, I think the police will probably be up there for all of this stupid talk about, oh, well, let's just defund the police. All right, OK, well, what happens there? Or slam the police so we end up with no recruit. I mean, it's no surprise that the Met has missed its target. I mean, they've faced the most abuse possible. Why would anyone want to go and join the Metropolitan Police now? Because if you walk into a local community and say that you want to join the Met, they probably assume that you've got pretty catastrophic intentions. But there we go. Look, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, Graham. Great chat, Graham Wetton there, former Met police officer and, crucially, author of How to Be a Police Officer. Hopefully the sales of that book now spike following this appearance. But there we go. Get a load of this. Councils across the country have been branded killjoys, coronation killjoys. That's right, after refusing to let people celebrate next week's coronation. If you're thinking about going out in your local park, putting a blanket down, having a picnic, seriously now, you might even need planning permission to do that. The world has gone mad. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back, everybody. Now, I just want to say again that we are expecting to be hearing from Andrew Bridgen relatively shortly on this very show. Now, Andrew Bridgen has basically been exiled from the Conservative Party, kicked out of the Tory Party for his comments in relation to the COVID vaccine, saying it's the worst humanitarian disaster since the Holocaust. He's released a statement in which he says that he's been unfairly treated and that there is a cover-up going on and that there's corruption. Now, the flip side to that, as I'm sure we can all see, is that some people say that what he said there is morally unconscionable, that he just shouldn't have compared it to the Holocaust. He would say that he was quoting somebody else saying that, and here we end up in this particular mess right now. But I wanted to defer to what you guys are saying on this, because I'm finding it fascinating in the inbox at the moment, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm not going to read names out on this, because some of the stuff is pretty personal. So this individual says, my granny, who is 101 and is still alive, is a Holocaust survivor. And she is not offended by what Andrew Bridgen said, so why is anyone else? This individual also goes on to say that they are, or claim that they are, a COVID vaccine victim. The last 2 years of their life have been hell, and they've been ignored and gaslit by the medical professionals. Andrew is the MP supporting the victims. So that's that side of it, isn't it? A lot of people feel as though people, because it was unfashionable, or people were very scared of it, or people didn't want to raise issues with the coronavirus vaccine for fear of seeming like a crank, that they didn't do it, and Andrew Bridgen was one of the people who did, and now he's potentially paid for that with his job, or certainly his membership of the Conservative Party. There's another one here, and this is another one here, which says nobody else was talking about this particular issue apart from Andrew Bridgen. Do you think that the main issue is not so much that Andrew Bridgen was highlighting potential issues with the coronavirus vaccine? It's maybe more that he used the word Holocaust. I suspect that was more of the shock and awe when people saw that message initially, or heard him talk initially. Let me know what you think. The other big topic for us today, and again, we are awaiting for an individual who's just landed back on that first flight back from Sudan. So these are British citizens who we have evacuated from Sudan in light of the conflict that's taking place there. We're hoping to chat to someone who's just got off that plane. As you can imagine, they're a bit busy at the minute. They've just been repatriated. But I was broadening this out. I want to know whether or not you think that we have a moral duty to give refuge to ordinary people from Sudan. So when we pulled out of Afghanistan, people made the case that we had a moral duty because we invaded that country and we were responsible for some of the ongoing mess that took place there and the evacuation of people, interpreters, etc. Ukraine, OK, people were looking at what was going on there and saying, good grief, you know, Putin's just rolled the tanks in. We have a moral obligation to Ukrainian citizens, not least because we had a part in telling them to get rid of nuclear weapons, which I think in no small part did also lead to Vladimir Putin going in. So you can look at those things and go, maybe we've got a moral obligation there. Syria as well, we decided not to launch in airstrikes, didn't we? And then, of course, what happened there, we said, well, we'll take in the humanitarian disaster as a result of not going and choosing to get involved massively militarily. Is Sudan the same? Do you think we have a moral obligation to get, aside from ordinary British citizens out there, just the people of Sudan? Do we? And I've been asking this in the inbox so far. No, we do not. This is according to Alan. We should only take in people who've got a British passport. We cannot go on forever taking in people. It's not our problem, he says. The UK is a sponge sucking up everybody else's problems. And there's a lot of this going about at the moment. And I just wonder whether or not you feel the same way. Do you look at what's going on in Sudan and think these are desperate people, they are in plight and we need to take them in? Or do you think that the UK could well end up becoming, as Alan says, a sponge for soaking up the world's problems? And where do we draw the line for that? Because unfortunately, there are a lot of countries and a lot of people in distress. So the two big ones for us today, Andrew Bridgen, is it right that the Tory party have expelled him? And also, do you think we have a moral duty and obligation to take in non-British citizens, so just ordinary people from Sudan? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Loads more still to come, though, between now and 4 o'clock as well, because after a shocking report into the number of sexual assaults in hospitals, I will ask a nurse whether she thinks that staff should wear body cameras. Can you imagine going to a hospital in your hour of need, you're most vulnerable, you're most stressed out, and someone's filming you the whole time? I'm not sure I quite fancy that. And a royal family fanatic will give her reaction to the news that some councils are refusing to let people celebrate next week's coronation. Coronation killjoys. But right now, it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Patrick, thank you and good afternoon. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The first flight evacuating British nationals out of Sudan has landed in the UK. It's unclear how many were on board the aircraft, which arrived at Stansted Airport within the last hour or so. More than 300 people have been evacuated from Sudan so far. It's estimated around 4,000 Britons were stuck in the country. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting between military factions broke out more than 2 weeks ago. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. MP Andrew Bridgen has been expelled from the Conservative Party. It's after he compared COVID-19 vaccines to the Holocaust and was found to have breached lobbying rules. The North West Leicestershire MP was expelled on the 12th of April following the recommendation of a disciplinary panel and was given 28 days to appeal. He said he'll stand again at the next election whilst hitting out at what he called corruption, collusion and cover-ups in the political system. The Met Police Commissioner has admitted the force hasn't reached its recruitment target, saying they're 1,000 officers light. More than 20,000 new police officers have been hired in England and Wales, but Britain's biggest police force missed its individual target. The ongoing recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next 10 years. The Prime Minister earlier said that although progress is good, more work is needed. Meanwhile, Mr Rowley admits the Met's shortcoming is partly down to the force's current reputation. And a man has been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the 9-year-old last summer. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman was responsible for her murder, claiming he wasn't aware of this when he helped him. He's been sentenced to 22 months in prison. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2483 and €1.1281. The price of gold is £1,602.95 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,828 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, I don't know about you, but I can't wait for next week's coronation. But that's not the case everywhere, because councils across the UK have been branded killjoys, and rightly so. This just sums up the utter jobsworth that sometimes occupy our council buildings. So they are refusing to let people celebrate the big day. The coronation of King Charles will take place on Saturday, May the 6th, but councils have refused permission for some street parties, and North Somerset Council won't even let people have a picnic in their local park unless they fill out a risk assessment form. It has to be, and I am not joking now, people, an approved picnic on the day of the coronation. Good grief. Get a life. Just get a life. I'm joined now by royal family fanatic and all-round legend. It's Anita Atkinson. Yes. OK. Now, Anita, I don't know about you, right, but I don't think anyone would get in the way. No council official with a high-vis jacket and a clipboard is going to get in the way of my coronation picnic. I mean, do you think this is just jobsworths?
I've got no idea what it is, Patrick, because in County Durham we don't have that problem at all. You keep laughing every time I come on this programme.
I just love you. I just think you're great. I think you should have your own show here. I don't know what it is. There's just something so charming about you. But look, you're obviously, you know, let's be honest with you, absolutely mad for it, right? Do you think that everyone should just be allowed to celebrate the coronation in whatever way they want?
Everyone is allowed to celebrate their coronation in any way they want. But I think what they have to be mindful of is any safety issues that's brought up by councils. But I can tell you that Durham County Council are allowing anyone, anywhere, to close a road, and they even offering to lend them the road closed signs. There's no problem. Why can that not happen in any other local authority? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's such a special thing as well. It's the kind of thing that especially children, I think, need to remember. And one way to mark that would be to have a local street party. It would be to maybe go to the park with your parents and have a nice picnic and, you know, have a bit of a barbecue or whatever you're doing. And I just find it a bit of a shame, Anita, that some people might be banned from doing that.
Well, they're not banned from doing it because they can do it if they want. We still do live in a free country. But like I said, if there's any safety issues, anyway, you don't have to have a barbecue. What's the matter with an afternoon tea? And in any case, if you live in Kent or wherever they are, they're banning you. Just hop on the train and come up here to County Durham. Every road is available to you.
It's very true. You know, they talk about levelling up, don't they? Maybe that's the way to do it. You get people from the home counties to come up to where you are there in County Durham. The one problem that I've got with all of this, though, Anita, is that you're not going to be there to greet them, are you? Because last time I spoke to you already had your bag packed for the coronation. Talk us through it. What's going on?
Well, I do. I've still got my bag packed for the coronation, and I've got my doll what I'm taking as well. And I am going to camp on the Mall. I don't care what happens, and I don't care which council official is going to try and stop us. They're going to have to cart us away. But that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm going down on this Saturday. I've only got a couple of days to go, and I'll be there for 10 days. And I'll be walking the streets, sleeping in the streets, and doing whatever I want. It is a free country, Patrick.
We need more Anitas in this world. I am telling you, you are everything that's good about this nation. Anita, why do you care so much then? Why are you going to go out of your way and spend, I think it's reasonable to assume, the longest amount of time of anyone in the country camping out, waiting for the coronation?
No, I'm not the longest one. Well, in the country maybe, but I've got a friend from America who's coming down to London even before I am. She's coming all the way from America. And today I've had a couple from Australia visit me here in my home. And people are coming from all over the world to do this, and they're staying a lot longer than 10 days than what I'm doing. Wow. But why is it so? I am a monarchist, Patrick. This is the people's celebration. This is the people's party. Go out, have your picnic if you want. Come down to London and stay in the Mall if you want. I've waited 66 years for this, man, and I'm not missing a single moment, and I am doing what I want. I'm going to enjoy myself.
Oh, fantastic. And Anita, I'm hoping to be a part of GB News' coronation coverage, OK? Unless there's something someone's not telling me that's going to change in the next few days, so hopefully not. But I would love, if it's all right, to pay you a little visit at some point, and maybe we can do a bit of a show from Anita's tent.
Yes. If you need a co-host, Patrick, I'm your person,
I think everyone agrees, Anita, that I do. So thank you very much. And look, yes, keep fighting the good fight, Anita. It'd be great to see you, and I look forward to seeing you, and take care. All right, safe travels getting down here, and I'll see you in the next few days by the sounds of things. Anita Atkinson there, all-round legend, a fantastic. Sorry, she's managed to make me laugh so much there that I've started crying, actually. We need more Anita in this world. Well, you would not like to be, would you, a council official that tells Anita that she's not able to have her coronation picnic. Sorry, Anita, you can't have that quiche here. I think that quiche would find its way somewhere that the sun doesn't shine very, very quickly, and rightly so. So, look, get a load of this. So, local authorities in Wiltshire, the London Borough of Ealing and Warwick will enforce strict restrictions on holding barbecues in public parks. Now, part of me can understand the barbecues in public parks thing. People leave a mess. There is also quite a serious fire hazard, although we don't live in the bush, do we? But there we go. Edinburgh City Council have asked those planning street parties not to hang bunting across any public roads open to traffic. Again, I can just about see the logic behind that. But I am having a look at North Somerset Council. If anyone is watching from North Somerset Council now. I really hope this isn't true. And if it isn't true, then you've got to get in touch with us and correct the record quickly on this, because it's announced it will require a 9-page form and a risk assessment before revellers are able to tuck in to their coronation picnics with neighbours. They're only going to allow, apparently, this is according to reports, approved picnics across their 500 acres of parks, because the parks were for everyone's enjoyment. Approved picnics. It's a coronation. Good grief. I mean, seriously, get a life, you clipboard warriors. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm going to delve back into the inbox now, though, because, like I said, I've got a lot coming up. We are, I believe, anyway, a matter of minutes away from talking live on the show to Andrew Bridgen. Andrew Bridgen, in case you're just joining us, has been booted out of the Conservative Party, primarily over his comments about the vaccine, COVID vaccine, and him saying that it was a humanitarian disaster, one of the biggest since the Holocaust. So, again, a lot of people I know are getting in touch, say he didn't compare it to the Holocaust. I understand that, OK? But we all are aware of the optics of that. And that, I think, was really one of the things that made people initially wince and hugely distance themselves from him. Andrew Bridgen has released a statement in which he says that he's been unfairly treated, that there is a corruption and a cover-up going on here, and he is desperately trying to expose what nobody else appears to be willing to do, in his view, which is to highlight the plight of people who had a negative or vaccine injured, isn't it? Vaccine injured, and people who sadly lost their lives as a result of the coronavirus vaccine. The people on the other side of this will say that he sounds a bit like a crank, and that there are, conspiracy theorists out there. He is adamant, absolutely adamant, as he no doubt will come on and talk about, that he's perfectly well within his rights to say it. It's a freedom of speech issue as much as anything, and he's talking for a marginalised group of people. I've got to be honest with you, a huge amount of love for Andrew Bridgen in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Andrew Bridgen was one of the last voices of reason in the so-called Conservative Party. Losing Dominic Raab was bad. This is even worse. We are doomed. And that is from Sue in Felixstowe. I'm a Conservative Party member, says Pauline, but following Bridgen's expulsion and Raab's resignation, unsupported by Rishi Sunak, I'm handing in my membership card. I've had enough. That's from Pauline. So there's a lot of that going about. Look, if you've got a different view and you think that what Andrew Bridgen said was completely unconscionable, then get in touch. gbviews@gbnews.uk. We can put that to him live here on this show, can't we? Now, moving on. Nurses could wear body cameras after a shocking report into the number of rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals. So that's the safety side of it. The other bit of it, though, is if you're there, in massive plight and physical ill health, and a nurse turns up with a body camera on, is that what you really want? Are you worried about that? Is that against your human rights? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I often wonder if government ministers are looking at this show and listening to it. And it appears maybe they are, just maybe they are, because in the last few moments I've got some breaking news to bring you on one of our key talking points today. I was asking whether or not you think that we have a moral obligation to take in refugees fleeing from Sudan. So not just British citizens, so refugees. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, in the last few moments has just been speaking. Let's hear what she had to say.
We have no plans to do that. Our focus, first and foremost, right now, and bearing in mind this is a fast-moving situation and a complex situation, is to support British nationals and their dependents.
So there you go. So no additional safe and legal routes, whatever you want to call them, are going to be implemented at this stage by our government for people fleeing Sudan. So just British citizens. Do you think that we should have had a moral obligation to take in Sudanese refugees? So far, the overwhelming consensus is no, we already do our bit. Anyway, moving on. Nurses could wear body cameras after a report uncovered a shocking number of rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals. So more than 6,500 offences took place in less than 4 years, up to last October. But it got me thinking, really, that is this against the human rights of the patients? I get that they're there supposedly to protect people. I can see the logic behind that. But do you want a nurse rocking up with a body camera on? I'm not sure I would. Let's go through some of the findings of this report. So a bit of context. This is from the Women's Rights Network. There were a total of 6,539 rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals between January 2019 and October 2022. 1,021 of those offences took place on hospital wards. 265 people were charged, which is just 4.1% of the reported crimes. Not all police forces responded to this Freedom of Information request, so it is kind of a partial finding. And the Women's Rights Network wants to point out that these crimes are often underreported, so the true figures are probably much higher. Undeniably shocking stats there. I certainly massively was taken aback when I first read that report. I thought, good grief, is this going on in our hospitals? But the idea now that nurses, the solution to this is for nurses to wear body cameras at all times, I'm just not sure that's right. How would you feel about that? I'm going to talk now to a registered nurse and writer, Sarah Jane Palmer. Sarah, great to talk to you. Thank you very, very much. Let's get right to it then. Do you think that it's right for nurses to wear body cameras at all times?
I think, yeah, there's a strong argument for it, because the thing is, what you've got to remember is the camera's not always on. It's only on when an incident is occurring, and it's already in use among community nursing teams as well. Paramedics use them, obviously the police do, security in hospitals already have them. So I think nurses, considering the risk that's posed to them when they're with a patient and they have to close the curtains and there's no staff on the ward anyway, so you can't get someone to just accompany you at all times for these sorts of procedures with the patient, that in your vulnerability, you do need something like that as protection, because it acts as a good deterrent, so patients think twice before they act, but it also captures the context of a whole situation. It can capture whether an assault is occurring or if it isn't occurring, and the key thing is it also captures if the patient might have or doesn't have insight as well. Sorry, someone's...
No, I think
that's
all right. No, you're still with us. Don't worry. No, that is a really fascinating thing, actually, because, you know, as ever, I might not have always have thought of every single particular solution. I was thinking of, let's just say, you know, you're kind of very old or vulnerable individual lying there on a bed might be a bit perturbed by someone with a camera on.
Yeah.
But actually, I suppose this threat does go both ways, and some people might genuinely feel more comfortable, not least potentially the nurses themselves, who I would imagine have to deal with some very difficult characters, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially in emergency departments, they get such a high rate of people that have been misusing alcohol and drugs, and you know, the level of intoxication in so many patients is so high that they are disinhibited, and you do need to capture the evidence if any assault does occur. And you know, I worked with someone actually who was attacked by a patient. The patient came up behind him and tried to strangle him, and he fell unconscious, and it caused a lot of trauma. I think, you know, these assaults do take place and they need to be captured. And you do deal with all sorts of people. And you also have patients that come out of prison just so they can have the treatment at, you know, a specialist centre like at St George's or wherever. I've seen people that have come out of prison to have their treatment, and you're not allowed to know what they've done or anything. So you don't really know if they're at risk, but they do have police with them. But I still think that given the amount of the types of patients that walk through the doors, you don't know how they're going to behave. And I think for your own protection, you do need something that is able to record them if necessary. But of course, we don't want the misuse of these recording devices. We don't want to weaponise them either. But you know, there is training for them. It's that they're already safely rolled out across the community and safely used among lots of healthcare practitioners. So, yeah, I think, you know, I think it's a really good move. I don't know why they're not really in place already. I think in the hospital as well, it's almost like you are lone working, like you're out in the community, because often you are having to shut the curtains and be with the patient alone. So, you know, the risk is the same. So I think it's important. And like I said about context, sometimes you have patients that are really mentally unwell.
Yeah.
They might not have insight, and they might, you know, assault you, but they haven't got the insight. So it's important for their sake and yours that the evidence really captures the context of the situation and can be analysed appropriately. And it's good use for, you know, evidence in court should it get that far.
Well, look, absolutely. Sarah, thank you very, very much. I think you've given me pause for thought there, really, and quite possibly changed my mind on that. So thank you very much. Sarah J. Parwitt there, registered nurse and a writer. Just reacting to that story, that nurses now may well wear body cameras, initially in a response to the complaints and the cases and the shockingly high level of sexual assaults taking place in hospitals, including rapes and all of that stuff, so the most serious level there, and whether or not that is actually a good thing now. I think I've kind of shifted a bit, I don't know about you, from looking at it from the patient's perspective of, oh gosh, I'm on camera here in my most vulnerable moment and I don't necessarily want all of this recorded, to actually, I suppose, if I'm probably going to be on film by a security guard anyway, and if this person's going to make me better and it makes everyone feel more comfortable, maybe that's all right. I would just be very concerned about the safety issue and is that footage going to find itself anywhere? But yes, time for something completely different now, ladies and gentlemen, because it is Patrick's Pick of the Day, when I focus on a story that might have flown under the radar. And today, I want to talk about, get this, these seagulls who are terrorising two flatmates in Newcastle. There's just a little one here that caught my eye earlier on. So Georgina Gray and Helen McKeever say that the birds are constantly banging on their window for, get this, 12 hours a day. And we can see there, people watching us on telly or online, this little winged terrorist that is knocking on the window non-stop. It's the comments, though, the quotes in this article that absolutely floored me this morning when I saw this. So Georgina, bless her, says, "We don't know what they want. They just sit here all day. It's like some sort of horror film. Helen has squared up to them before, but they aren't fazed. They come back every day at 6:30 on the dot. It's an absolute nightmare. I even Googled how long seagulls live for, hoping that they might just die because we are demented, but they live for 20 years. So there we go. All right, OK, well, that story certainly got me going this morning anyway. I just thought I'd bring you a little bit of light relief, although sadly it's not light relief, is it, for Georgia and Helen? But yes, there we are. Right, OK, ladies and gentlemen, I've still got loads more coming your way. Andrew Bridgen has been kicked out of the Conservative Party after he compared COVID-19 vaccines with the Holocaust. He didn't do it directly, so it's the worst humanitarian issue since then. So I'm going to talk to him live on GB News in a matter of moments, so do not miss that. I'm Patrick Christys, right here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope? It's very much so. And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a wonderful afternoon to you all. It's Patrick Christys here on GB News. It's just gone 4 o'clock, and right at the top of this hour, fingers crossed, we have got this man, Andrew Bridgen. Yes, he's just been booted out of the Conservative Party for the comments that he made in relation to the COVID vaccine and, of course, making reference to the Holocaust. Plenty of people feel that that's the right decision. Plenty of people feel as though he was really unfairly treated in standing up for a marginalised group of people who suffered as a result of having the vaccine. Which side are you on? I will put all of this to Andrew Bridgen himself right here on this show in, fingers crossed, just a few minutes' time. Elsewhere, though, do we have a moral obligation to make safe and legal routes for Sudanese refugees? Or are we already doing our bit? We're getting British citizens out. Should we take more people, or are we already doing our bit? Elsewhere as well, yes, that's right. So the Tories are saying that they've hit their 20,000 new police recruits target. Bit sceptical about that, personally, given that they biffed 20,000 of them not so long ago. But who on earth would actually be a police officer in this day and age? All the knife crime and the body cams and accusations of racism and all of that jazz. I'm going to be talking about all of that. In other news, yes, do you feel poor? Well, if you do, this chap just thinks that you're going to have to get used to it. The Bank of England's chief economist just basically says if you're poor, Suck it up, guys. How do you think about that? I mean, actually, I've got a bit of info about how much money he's on and how much money he stands to earn when he leaves that job as well. So I'm not sure he'll ever really know what it's like to be poor. Elsewhere, just to round us off for the hour as well, no sex, please, we're British. Yes, that's right. Apparently, more people than ever are choosing to be celibate. What do you make of that? Patrick Christys on GB News. Yeah, that last one's a little bit close to home. Anyway, right, get your views coming in, people. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Andrew Bridgen will be on shortly. Fire your questions at him. I can put them to him. Do you think we have a moral obligation to take in more people from Sudan, or are we already doing our bit? gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, though, headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. And our top story on GB News this hour. The Home Secretary says there are no plans to create safe routes out of Sudan for refugees. The first flight carrying British nationals out of the country has landed successfully in the UK today at Stansted. More than 300 people have had to be evacuated from the country so far, and it's estimated around 4,000 British nationals were stuck there. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting between military factions broke out more than 2 weeks ago. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours now ahead of us as the military races to rescue people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. Suella Braverman says the government's priority is rescuing British people.
We have no plans to do that. Our focus, first and foremost, right now, and bearing in mind this is a fast-moving situation and a complex situation, is to support British nationals and their dependents.
Well, Rosanne Ahmed, who was forced to make her own way out of Sudan, spoke to us earlier about her journey.
It isn't easy. It isn't safe. It's a massive, massive risk to go out on the streets and drive and attempt to move in the midst of war. And it's also not cheap. It's very expensive. So it was a harrowing journey.
Rosanne Ahmed. Now here, the MP Andrew Bridgen has been expelled from the Conservative Party. That's after he retweeted a comparison between COVID-19 vaccines and the Holocaust and was found to have breached lobbying rules. The North West Leicestershire MP was expelled on April the 12th following the recommendation of a disciplinary panel and was given 28 days to appeal. He said he'll stand again at the next election, whilst he hit out at what he called corruption, collusion and cover-ups in the political system. Now, the leaders of Ukraine and China have held a telephone call for the first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. Chinese state media claims President Xi Jinping told Volodymyr Zelensky he's prepared to send special representatives to Ukraine to start peace talks. President Xi is the most powerful world leader to have refrained from denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, making a state visit to Russia to meet President Putin just last month. Since February, he's been promoting what he calls a 12-point peace plan. Now here, the Met Police Commissioner has admitted the force hasn't reached its recruitment target, saying they're about 1,000 officers short. More than 20,000 new police officers have, though, been hired in England and Wales. Britain's biggest police force, though, missing out on its individual target. The ongoing recruitment programme expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next decade. The Prime Minister earlier said that enough progress is being done, but more work is needed. Mr Rowley said the Met's shortfall was partly down to the force's current reputation.
I wish we'd hit it, but we haven't.
Why haven't you?
So I think there are a range of factors in this. We have recruited over the last 3 years more than 9,000 officers, which is the most I think ever in such a short period. We haven't hit the target. Obviously, we are striving to maintain the quality. That's really important. I think there are factors which include both. I think the reputation of the organisation at the moment doesn't help recruiting.
Now, a man has been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the 9-year-old in Liverpool last summer. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman was responsible for her murder, claiming he was not aware of that when he helped him. He's been sentenced to 22 months in prison. The Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says an investigation has now opened that could see him serve an extra 30 years in jail. Mr. Navalny, who's currently serving 11.5 years in jail, is being investigated on terrorism charges, a charge he's called absurd. He survived an assassination attempt in 2020 after being poisoned. The Kremlin denies any involvement. And new data reveals the average cost of annual car insurance is now £107 more expensive than it was 12 months ago. The research from one poll found that average price of the policy taken out for people in the first 3 months of this year was £637. That's the highest since they peaked in 2011. On average, those surveys were charged £53 more for their renewal price on their existing policy. You're at GB News. More headlines in half an hour. See you then.
Yes, welcome along, everybody. Let's start with this afternoon's big breaking news, and that is that Andrew Bridgen has been kicked out of the Conservative Party after he compared COVID-19 vaccines to being one of the largest crimes against humanity since the Holocaust. Now, Bridgen was also found to have breached lobbying rules by a disciplinary panel, and he says that he's been expelled from the party, quotes, under false pretences. Now, Bridgen had been a Tory MP since 2010. He lost the whip in January. I'm going to read you out what Andrew Bridgen had to say about this. So, he said, my expulsion from the Conservative Party under false pretences only confirms the culture of corruption, collusion and cover-ups which plagues our political system. I have been a vocal critic of the vaccine rollout, and the party have been sure to make an example of me. So that's what Andrew Bridgen has had to say about all of this. I am hoping that we are going to go live to Andrew Bridgen outside Westminster in a matter of moments. We are just trying to scramble around and get him on screen. So fingers crossed we will go to Andrew Bridgen very, very shortly. Lots of questions to put to him. Look, pretty simply, do you think that the Conservative Party is right to get rid of him? Did you find that his comments certainly linking the COVID vaccines, I mean, some would argue anything, to the Holocaust, is just disgusting and is worthy of the boot? Or is he actually standing up for a group of people who were shunned, who were let down, and who, frankly, died in many cases as a result of the coronavirus vaccine? Do you think that he's actually doing great work for people, a marginalised group, or do you think that he caused massive offence and was bang out of order? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Look, I promise you, as soon as Andrew Bridgen is ready, we'll get him on the show. Right, moving on now. Oh, we've got him right on cue. Andrew Bridgen is about to pop up on your screens, I believe, ladies and gentlemen. Andrew Bridgen, are you there? Yes, he is.
I'm here for you all the time, Patrick.
All right, thank you very much. Well, look, first and foremost...
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. First and foremost, what's your reaction to being expelled from the Conservative Party?
Well, I'm very disappointed that the party have leaked this out. As I understand it, confidentiality was required for me to be able to appeal against the unwarranted expulsion from the Conservative Party. I think it's completely spurious. And I've issued a rebuttal document now to the public, which I sent to CCHQ some days ago. I couldn't even get them to respond, despite repeated requests for them to confirm they'd received it. Nothing back from various emails at CCHQ. I do recall that over the so-called offensive tweet, I was suspended within an hour or so. I don't know how they respond to complaints when they never respond to my complaints.
What have they said to you? As far as we're aware, you have been expelled from the Tory party, it says here, after comparing the coronavirus vaccines with the Holocaust. What have they said to you specifically about why you're no longer in the Tories?
Well, that's incorrect. The tweet in question, I was retweeting a world-leading cardiologist and a paper from a criminology doctorate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And the quote I retweeted from the cardiologist was that the vaccine rollout was the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. That is neither denying the Holocaust or belittling the Holocaust. It's using the Holocaust as a moment in time and saying that the rollout of the vaccines is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust.
I've got to ask you, is that a flawed and potentially quite offensive comparison? 6 million Jews, at least, amongst other groups as well, died during the Holocaust.
No, I think
people would say people have said, haven't they,
a lot more people than that will be injured.
Comparison. Go on.
Well, 25 of the world's leading Jewish doctors and scientists wrote a letter to Number 10 on the 30th of December. It was not initiated by me, but I was sent a copy of it. Number 10, they accused the Prime Minister of falsely accusing me of anti-Semitism, which obviously diminishes anti-Semitism, and they also accused the Prime Minister of seeking to shut down my right to free speech in the House of Commons, which they regarded as a sign of a totalitarian regime, which they find deeply worrying. Now, when challenged, Number 10 said initially they hadn't received that letter. It was then subsequently sent recorded delivery and arrived on the 10th of February. That letter's remained unanswered by Number 10. I also put that into my evidence pack, originally rebutting these allegations against me, and that was never mentioned in the dismissal letter. That they just conveniently ignored 25 of the world's leading Jewish scientists and doctors who defended me.
Do you regret saying it now in the cold light of day, given that you've been expelled?
It's deeply upsetting to be expelled from a party I've served for several decades and campaigned hard for, but I barely recognise the Conservative Party at the moment. We seem to have moved away from being a party that legislates for the people to a party that legislates against the people. Surely I've got the right to free speech to express the genuine and legitimate concerns of my constituents about the safety and efficacy of experimental vaccines which were never tested properly. We know there's considerable vaccine harms. They're starting to emerge now. And Patrick, before I spoke out in December, and what urged me to do so was when the government were looking at approving the experimental vaccines for children down to the age of 6 months, to babies. As a result of those speeches I gave in Parliament, the government position has moved in a few months from wanting to vaccinate babies of 6 months. That never happened. Then they moved the position to only over 50s and the immunocompromised in January, for February the 12th. I gave another speech on the 17th of March pointing out how the boosters were the lack of efficacy and the cost of them and the dangers of them. And then it's moved to over 75s, a completely different position that the government were adopting. And I put it to you, there was no one else speaking out. And if that's cost me my political career, then so be it, quite honestly, Patrick, because if I've saved the life or one child from being injured, that's worth it, isn't it?
Well, what would you say to people, Andrew, who would say that maybe you've overplayed the harms of the vaccines and that maybe you have overstated how experimental they were or how much potential damage that they could cause for people, that basically you've gone a bit OTT?
Well, let's debate it then, Patrick. But every time I stand up to speak, the chamber of the House of Commons empties. They put up ministers who aren't even qualified to in the area of specialisation. The last two speeches I've given, we've had a minister who wasn't even the minister to respond to that question. This is not open and free democracy. You know that there's a narrative out there, and if you go against the narrative that the vaccines are safe and effective, which they're not, you get closed down. I'm banned from the 13th of December, when I stood up in the House of Commons and said that the vaccines we needed to investigate. I've been basically cancelled from the mainstream media.
I'm just going to come in and say you're perfectly entitled to your view. Of course you are, and that is that. At the same time, would you accept that the vaccines did save lives, though? Would you accept that?
I don't see that the evidence is out there that would support that the risk from the vaccine didn't outweigh the benefits to all age groups. In the data that I've presented to the House of Commons, even the most vulnerable, the over 70s, at the best case scenario, they needed 800 boosters to keep one person out of hospital, not acutely out of hospital, whereas 1 in 800 is at least the average for a severe adverse reaction from the boosters themselves. So there was no benefit even to the most vulnerable group in society. And I explained all that to the Chamber and the House on the 17th of March. No one's been able to rebut those figures because they are scientifically evidenced.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, I suppose...
And when all this is investigated, Patrick, if it's investigated independently, I'm afraid, and I really wish I wasn't.
Well, you obviously know.
I wish I was wrong, but I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, look, you obviously know, Andrew, don't you, that the World Health Organization and a lot of other scientists and doctors would come out and massively dispute what you've said there. And so I suppose I do kind of have to ask, why do you think you're right and they're not?
Because all the people who say that they're safe and effective are on the science and medical side have got a financial interest. 86% of the funding of the Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency is from Big Pharma. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the members of that committee, who are supposed to look at the efficacy and safety of vaccines, they had to declare over £1 billion of personal interest in Big Pharma. Our regulators are compromised, Patrick. The people who are giving me the science,
is that true? Is that true?
They haven't got a peculiar interest. Those are the figures. Go and check them up for yourself. And who do you think funds the WHO? The biggest funder to the WHO is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Gavi, both controlled by Bill Gates, who you might remember made an awful lot of money out of mRNA vaccines.
Look, it would obviously, as I'm sure you can understand, Andrew, it goes without saying that many people would dispute the fact that they were compromised, etc. That's your view. They would have a different view. They would dispute that. Why do you feel so passionately about this? This is, let's be honest with you, the hill you have chosen to die on. You could have had a perfectly comfortable gig, no doubt, in the House of Commons until the people of North West Leicestershire decide that they've had enough of you. Why did you decide to, for want of a better phrase, die on this hill?
Because this is about the safety and the health and well-being of children, and when the government, certainly young people, are at no risk of dying from COVID-19, but there's a clear risk from the vaccine. It doesn't make scientific sense to expose people. The first rule of medicine is do no harm. Sajid Javid was advised by... There are a number of doctors who are Conservative MPs. I know that he was advised, when he took over from Matt Hancock, not to authorise the experimental vaccines for anyone under 18. He listened to that advice, but he didn't take it, and he authorised them. That was a huge mistake, Patrick. The harms that have been done are not rare. They're common. They're at least 1 in 800, and it could be down to 1 in 300, a severe adverse event. That's why we've got excess deaths. Another issue we can't debate in Parliament, no matter how many times I ask for it, there's 1,000, 2,000 excess deaths a week in this country, and Parliament does not want to debate it. I mean, this just isn't right.
OK, now, look, Andrew, again, I've got to say, I imagine that a lot of the claims that you made there are disputed and the people involved will take a different view, etc. Look, can I just ask a slightly broader question, which is...
we haven't got excess deaths.
OK, well, why do you feel as though... people aren't willing to stick their head above the parapet and say what you're saying if, as in your view, all of the evidence is there? Why do you think that is, that you're...
The evidence is there, yes. Well, my degree was in biological sciences at Nottingham University a long time ago, and it was in biological sciences with a subsidiary in the first year in biochemistry, and I specialised in genetics and behaviour, and my final dissertation was on viruses and viroids. I probably have more qualifications than most in that place to look at the data. Patrick, in the house behind us, we're traditionally supposed to speak without fear or favour. What I will tell you is that is not true. There is a lot of fear and there's a lot of favour in that house, and that's not democratic. And I try to speak out for the people. And, well, if that's the end of my career, so be it.
Well, all right, Andrew, look, so thank you very, very much for your time today. I've just quickly, I mean, what is the plan going forward? Are you appealing this? Are you just planning on trying to, rejoin the Conservative Party, stand for election?
I will be standing at the next general election. It's only leaked out today. I wasn't planning on this. We've released the documents that we've sent to CCHQ as a rebuttal to their expulsion. It's completely spurious. Patrick, I didn't even have the codes to the Twitter account. I've never had them in any time that I've been an MP. They're not interested. The party aren't interested in that. Quite honestly, it was a kangaroo court. And they got the decision they wanted.
One more on that one. I'm getting a few emails in about this, which is that although for radically different issues, it must be said, Andrew, for radically different issues, people like, for example, Dominic Raab going recently, people are concerned that there might be a little bit of a push against Brexiteers, in a sense. Would you stand by that? Is this... A lot of people, Andrew, look, I've got to be honest with you, a lot of people will massively disagree with what you're saying, including, and I know you will dispute this,
what I've noticed...
the medical community, right? So I've got to say that. That said, though, is there any sense from your perspective that this maybe isn't just about the things that you've said there? Is this maybe a slightly bigger picture that you're not necessarily the kind of person that the Conservative Party want in it as it moves forward? Is that something you wonder about?
I think anybody who challenges the official narrative on anything is now under pressure. That is not free speech, and it's certainly not democracy. I would ask you to have a look at the list of MPs who voted against the government and voted against Plan B in Christmas 21, December 21. I was one of those. I've looked at that list of Conservative MPs who voted against the government about the masks, the mandates on the NHS and the additional lockdowns, which were all proven to be unnecessary because of the Omicron variant. Look how many of those have either been suspended or attacked by our own party. That's quite considerable. That's what it's all about. I spoke out a long time ago about these measures. The whole pandemic response has led to a huge amount of problems, unnecessary damage to our economy, to the well-being of young people and their mental health, and it's still going on. And until we admit we've made mistakes, the government's made mistakes, we're not going to put anything right. And we certainly shouldn't be giving any more powers to the WHO to take over our laws and the administration of pandemics. They've got an appalling track record, and we should be steering well clear of any of that. It's the absolute antithesis of Brexit, taking back control.
Oh, Andrew, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you talking to us, especially in light of the recent news that you've been expelled from the Conservative Party. That is Andrew Bridgen there, who's been on the line there for about 20 minutes. So there we go. Now, look, obviously, Andrew's made a lot of claims there. Impossible to go through them, every single one of them with a fine-tooth comb, about the efficacy and the safety of vaccines and the way in which they're regulated, and indeed the medical and scientific data behind them all. It is important to say that the advice remains that vaccines are largely safe, and that a lot of the claims that Andrew made will no doubt be disputed by some of the people who he's made them against. But there we go. Anyway, GBViews at gbnews.uk. That was Andrew Bridgen there. Right, OK, so moving on from that. The first flight carrying British citizens from Sudan has landed at Stansted Airport. I am Patrick Christys on GB News, and we are Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, welcome back, everybody. Now to the Sudan crisis, and there's a big development in the last half hour. Suella Braverman has said that there are no plans to create safe and legal routes for Sudan refugees. These are not British passport holders, many of whom are already on planes back, some of whom have already touched down. This is about Sudanese refugees and whether or not we will create safe and legal passages for them. Here's a clip of her.
We have no plans to do that. Our focus, first and foremost, right now, and bearing in mind this is a fast-moving situation and a complex situation, is to support British nationals and their dependents.
Yes, OK, so there we go. So it comes after the first flight carrying British nationals evacuated from the country landed at Stansted Airport. A total of 4 flights carrying 301 people have now left Sudan. Another RAF plane was due to take off from an airstrip near the capital of Khartoum this afternoon. Let's get more on this with... who else, ladies and gentlemen? It's got to be, hasn't it? It's immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Harjap, how are you? It's only 20 minutes since the last time I saw you.
Yeah, about as good as yesterday.
Yeah. Jolly good. Well, fantastic. Right, OK, so how do you react to this breaking news that we had that Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, says she will be creating no more safe or legal routes to anyone looking to free Sudan apart from British nationals who are already on planes, we hope?
Well, it's in sort of line with the current policy of what she's been espousing and putting out. But then, I suppose, inevitably, we're going to have to be prepared for a wave of migrants from Sudan coming on small boats, and we'll have to deal with them accordingly. If you're not going to provide any safe routes, then people are going to use the only route available. And the people smugglers are probably already using that soundbite of Suella Braverman to sell it to people, saying, well, hold on, they're not going to let you in, they're not going to create a visa for you, but if you want to get into the UK, we can provide you that route. It's going to cost X amount of money. And there you go, that they're already, their value of the product will have gone up.
OK, I mean, do you think that realistically, though, we do have some kind of moral rights? I mean, I could understand it with Afghanistan to an extent. I could understand it with Ukraine for an extent. I could understand it with Hong Kong. I mean, Sudan, does the British taxpayer really have a moral obligation to pay for asylum for the Sudanese?
Well, we did rule in Sudan. And so, you know, we ruled there and we created the partition. So we gave the north of it to the Muslim Sudanese, and the south of it was given to the Christians. And there's been a conflict ever since. We did the same, the British Empire did the same in India when we created Pakistan and gave that to the Muslims and India to the Hindus, and there's been a conflict ever since between the two countries. So, I mean, we do have some sort of moral obligation, but not, I would say, more than what anyone else has. Germany will once again take the brunt of it, Spain and Italy, and they will take the most of the migrants. And proportionately, we should take some. I mean, we didn't rule in Ukraine, so why are we taking... You know, and we didn't create that.
The argument there was that we helped contribute towards them getting rid of their nuclear deterrent, and therefore that maybe made it more likely for Vladimir Putin to roll the tanks on in. Is there not a risk, Harjab, that if we apply that argument to everywhere that Britain used to have at some point somewhere to do with, that frankly we might end up becoming a sponge for the world and all of their problems?
Well, we can't say we're proud of the British Empire, but only when it suits us. So, I mean, we've got to take the good with the bad. And let's face it, the good that the British Empire did, they also did a lot of bad. And that includes wiping out a lot of people, killing a lot of people, and looting resources from countries. Now, if we stayed in a country, looted its resources and then split it up, and then basically, let's say, right, you lot fight each other for the rest of the resources, we've got nothing to do with it, Gov. That sounds a bit callous to say, well, hold on, if we can step in and offer some sort of help, even to 100 people or 200 people, that we're not going to do so. Whereas we've offered the same help to somewhere like Ukraine for what, thousands of people, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people. So, you know, where we've contributed to a country and used their resources and in effect taken stuff that belonged to that country, which we weren't entitled to, then it does make sense that, you know, that we should offer some sort of refuge, at least offer a safe route. To say we're not going to offer any visas to them, you know, we're not going to offer anywhere to apply, then we can't then moan when they turn up at our shores, then, Patrick. A lot
of people would say, Harjab, that our duty only really applies for those who have got British passports, the British citizens. I mean, everybody else. I mean, you know, at some point,
we're the last to help those as well. We're the last to help those. I mean, the shameful thing is that the French and the Germans actually evacuated more British citizens than we have to date. Even India managed to evacuate 300 citizens before we sent this plane. And so our 4,000 British citizens were stuck there thinking what to do. And the advice for them was just stay put, don't go out. And in fact, I think Ben Wallace's advice was, why don't you grab a taxi to the base? So, you know, great reasoning in a war-torn zone where there's bullets flying all over the place. Don't worry, hail an Uber. I'm sure the taxi driver will take you there, risk-free to the site. So it's not realistic. I mean, we talk about helping our own. We can't even do that. And this isn't the first time, is it? We didn't help our British citizens in Ukraine quick enough, Afghanistan quick enough.
Would there be a case, Harjab, just to say, you know, look, if you go to Sudan, you know the risks?
Yeah, well, that's fine, but there's 4,000 of our own diplomats in there. There's 4,000 of our own citizens in there. We are global Britain, and British people work all around the world. And if you're a British citizen, it's our duty to protect them. But also, where we once ruled, we should think, if we've used that country, totally drained it of its resources, do we have a moral obligation?
But then we start getting into reparations to the Romans and the Vikings territory, don't we, to be fair? Look, Harjab, thank you very, very much. We're going to have to leave it there. But just tomorrow I'll talk to you. Harjab Singh Bangal, their immigration lawyer. Right, now, loads more to come between now and 5 o'clock. We will discuss these very controversial comments from the Bank of England's chief economist, Hugh Pill, that we should just accept that we're poorer. And we will talk about a fascinating article that says more and more people are choosing to be celibate. But first, it's your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Good afternoon to you. The headlines this hour. The Home Secretary says there are no plans to create safe routes out of Sudan for refugees. The first flight carrying British nationals out of the country has landed in the UK this afternoon at Stansted. More than 300 people have been evacuated from the country so far, and it's estimated around 4,000 people were stuck there. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting between military factions broke out more than 2 weeks ago. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours now as the military races to rescue people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. Suella Braverman says the government's priority is rescuing Brits. And the MP, Andrew Bridgen, has spoken to GB News today, saying he's very disappointed the Conservative Party has leaked details of his expulsion. He was expelled from the party on the 12th of April on a recommendation from a disciplinary panel. That's after he questioned the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines and retweeted a comparison with the Holocaust. Clinical trials have showed all COVID vaccines are effective and safe. Mr. Bridgen was given 28 days to appeal, and he said he'll stand again at the next election. He's hit out at what he calls corruption and cover-ups in politics.
I barely recognise the Conservative Party at the moment. We seem to have moved away from being a party that legislates for the people to a party that legislates against the people. Surely I've got the right to free speech to express the genuine and legitimate concerns of my constituents about the safety and efficacy of experimental vaccines which were never tested properly.
Bridgen speaking to GB News a short time ago. Well, in other news, the Met Police Commissioner has admitted the force hasn't reached its recruitment target, saying they're about 1,000 officers short. More than 20,000 new police officers have been hired in England and Wales, but Britain's biggest police force missed its individual target. The ongoing recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next decade. And the Prime Minister said earlier that although progress has been good, more work is needed. Meanwhile, Mr Rowley admits the Met's shortcoming is partly down to the force's current reputation. Now, a man has been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the little girl last summer in Liverpool. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman was responsible for her murder and he hadn't been aware that he'd helped him. He's been sentenced, though, to 22 months in prison. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app, this is GB News.
OK, now to some very controversial comments from the Bank of England's economist. Hugh Pill says that Brits must accept that we're poorer. OK, so apparently Pill is on a cool £190,000 a year. He says asking for pay rises is stoking inflation. Joining me now is Ross Clark, who's a writer for The Spectator. Now, Ross, do you think that he's right to say that we should all just accept being poorer?
Well, he's right in that we are poorer as a country. The economy is static. Productivity hasn't really been growing for over a decade, or been growing very, very slowly. And if the economy is not growing, we cannot give ourselves above inflation pay rises. Some groups might get above inflation pay rises at the expense of others, but it is physically impossible for the whole population to get above inflation pay rises when the economy is not growing. But inflation is what is, you know, the device which stops that sort of perpetual motion machine, you know, creating us wealth which doesn't exist.
With respect, have people like him not made us poorer with some of the decisions that they've made, especially during the pandemic? And it sticks in the craw a little bit when he just goes, well, look, you're just going to have to accept it now.
Well, this is what I was saying this morning in The Spectator. We've got Hugh Pill, who's chief economist, also Ben Broadbent, the deputy governor, in the past 24 hours have tried to sort of repeat this line that quantitative easing, which is really a polite name for printing money, let's face it, did not cause inflation. And they're trying to deny any role of the Bank of England in this this surge of inflation we've had in the past 2 years. And there were economists warning right the way since quantitative easing began back in 2009, saying this will cause inflation. Look, it's happened in Zimbabwe, happened in Weimar Germany. Printing money causes inflation. And the Bank of England sort of said, no, we can get away with it. OK, if it's just in the depths of the economic crisis, maybe, but they carried on printing money even when the economy...
This is the thing, and now you've got some guy here. I mean, the optics of this are shocking, aren't they? You've got a guy who's on reportedly 190 grand a year. I imagine he's possibly on a few more quid than that. And potentially raising his profile as a result of comments like this, with a view of maybe increasing his salary exponentially as and when he decides to move on and no doubt get onto the after-dinner speaking circuit or get some lovely advisory roles somewhere else, whatever. OK, this guy, I don't think, knows about being poor. And a lot of people in this country right now are finding out about being poor. And do you not think maybe he's a visible symbol of a lot of what's wrong at the Bank of England?
Well, I think if you're going to tell the country that they're poor, they've got to accept they're poorer and they must not demand above inflation pay rises, then I think the first thing to do is set an example. And if you're on 190,000 a year, that means take a pay cut.
You think you should take a pay cut?
Yeah, don't even keep your pay the same. Take a pay cut, and that's, you know, if you're going to tell nurses, doctors, train drivers and everybody else in the country you cannot have an above inflation pay rise because it would just create more inflation, why not set an example and cut your pay by 10 grand a year or something?
But at its core, though, he does have a point, doesn't he? Because a lot of the arguments against people going on strike and against people wanting whopping great big pay rises. So a good example would be the junior doctors who say, we want our pay restored to, I think it's 2008 levels, which would equate, they say anyway, to roughly a 35% pay increase from where they are at the minute. And I think it's reasonable to say a lot of people go, that's ridiculous, we cannot afford that, on top of nurses' pay rises, train drivers and all of this stuff. So at his core, he has a point, doesn't he? Which is that we do have to accept that this country's economy is not in great shape and we have to rein it in a bit. We have to cut our collars. Just the way he said it, is that right?
Well, if we just... he's absolutely right in that. If we just pay ourselves more and the economy's actually producing more, you've got more money going after not more goods and services, that's a recipe for inflation, and that's...
But he should combine that with a bit of contrition, maybe, and say...
I think it would help enormously, wouldn't it? If he said, I'm cutting my pay by 10 grand a year, a token amount, he'd still be on 180 grand a year. Wouldn't that be a great idea?
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Maybe you should go and get a pay cut. Look, Ross, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure, and thank you for waiting around for a bit for us as well. That's Ross Clark there, who's a writer at The Spectator, just reacting there to that news that apparently we're all just going to have to accept, just roll over and accept that we're all poorer. Right, OK, well... don't fancy that myself, but there we go. More and more people, though, are choosing, get this, to go without sex. That's what Guardian writer says, anyway. Yep. Anyway, one word. Why? I have got some staggering news for you, ladies and gentlemen. More people than ever before, supposedly, are being voluntarily celibate. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us 4, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Now, so some people go through periods of celibacy through no fault of their own. COVID lockdown has a lot to answer for, doesn't it? But apparently some people are now actively choosing to be celibate. The hashtag celibacy has had more than 195 million views on TikTok, with voluntary or intentional celibacy trending online. But why, I hear you ask, why? Well, people claim that giving up sex is improving their focus, their mental health, their energy, and there was a 90% increase in Google searches for celibacy in January alone. We can speak now to relationship and sex therapist. It's Miranda Christys. Miranda, thank you very much. I've got to ask the obvious question. Do you think people really are voluntarily celibate, or could they just not get any?
Well, no, I actually genuinely do think people are looking at voluntary celibacy and literally for a number of different reasons. It's going to vary from person to person. But I think people are just generally feeling more empowered about in terms of their choices around relationships and around sex. And really, as part of that, obviously, having the choice as to whether they want to do it. Now, I mean, I'm sure we all know it's going to be no shocker that not everybody enjoys sex. Not everybody wants to be having sexual intimacy. In terms of the voluntary celibacy, I mean, you could ask, well, is this about partnered sex? Is this about, is this also including solo sex practices? So, yeah, very much. I think there is a genuine curiosity around it. And of course, with social media and people talking about it and potentially talking about the benefits of it or perceived benefits, then people are going to query it and are going to think, wow, if there's something that they're not feeling is right about it for them, whatever their situation.
One of the things that stood out for me, one of the things that stood out for me when I read this report actually was some of the case studies that they used. Now, some of them were, one of them was from a woman who said that she was only finding men who were keen on a one-night stand when she obviously wanted something a lot more than that, and she wasn't in a position where she felt she was able to find someone who wanted more, so she thought, I'll just give up because, for the obvious reason, she didn't want to keep having one-night stands, right? Another one was an individual who said that he led a very promiscuous lifestyle and ended up becoming quite ill as a result of it, and that has, I think, traumatised him, really. And so now, there are actual multiple different reasons why people just feel their life is better without the pressure of trying to have sex.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it'll catch on?
As I say, it honestly varies from person to person. I definitely think that people do consider it, may consider it for different reasons. For some people, they're never going to consider being celibate. That it just wouldn't be something that's at all appealing for them. But for others, as you're mentioning there may be things such as lifestyle, how it may be affecting in terms of their interests. Are they getting the sex they want? I think that's the key thing. It's thinking about it. If we think about it in terms of sex positivity, that comes into it in terms of like sexual interest. Are you having the sex that you want? As you said, somebody may be having casual relationships and they don't want the casual relationships or they don't want the casual sex. So that is going to make them think about it and think about, well, what else can I do?
Miranda, thank you very, very much. Insightful stuff. Miranda Christys there, who is a relationship and sex therapist. Right, OK, so, moving on. Sir Keir Starmer has said that boys should receive lessons in school on how to behave towards girls. Now, the Labour leader says that it would help reduce sexual violence and harassment, but I wonder whether or not this is yet another example of teachers trying to just play the role of the parent. I am joined now by author Ella Whelan and the assistant editor of Prospect magazine, Emily Lawford. Both of you, thank you very much. Ella, we'll start with you, if that's all right. Do you think that this is an example of teachers trying to play parent?
Well, perhaps. I mean, the way in which we talk to kids about, young people about sex comes from various forms. In fact, you know, they very often, as much as they don't listen to their teachers, they don't listen to their parents either. It's usually something they figure out themselves, as awful as that sounds, by kind of trial and error. But I think the biggest problem with this is that, you know, there's a complete misunderstanding of the reasons why men, you know, certain men still do bad things to women, from the very serious, like rape and assault, to the sort of less serious but annoying, like sexist comments. It's not because they've missed out on a sex and relationships educational class. It's they know very well what they're doing is wrong, and they're doing it in spite of it being wrong. So I think what we're in danger of doing is completely missing the point about how to fight for women's freedom and against sexism, and instead just, you know, I think giving young boys yet another complex, because what we're saying is you're very, very bad, awful little creatures that we have to train out of being bad, otherwise you'll harm girls. And I just don't know anyone sensible who thinks that's genuinely true.
Yeah, Emily, how would you respond to that now? Emily Lawford, assistant editor of Prospect magazine, to the idea that teachers might essentially be telling all boys just not to sexually assault girls and, you know, almost, I suppose, infantilising them like that.
I don't really think infantilising is correct. I mean, almost 80% of girls say sexual assault happens regularly in their schools. That's a huge problem. I think teachers telling them don't do that is going to solve it completely? Obviously not. But I also don't think boys are malevolent. I think education is definitely part of it. I think there are issues around consent that boys don't know, grey areas, things like when someone's too drunk, when there's pressure. I do think reinforcement education will help in those areas. Do I think it will stamp out completely? Definitely not. I don't think I don't think people should be telling boys, oh, your masculinity is inherently toxic or anything like that. But clearly, I mean, there's a huge problem. I don't want the idea of trial and error. I don't want girls to be collateral damage in boys growing up. I don't want what should be informative sexual experiences, what should be good, or if not, you know, for both people. I don't want that to be traumatizing for girls, and I don't think boys are going to become traumatized by a lesson that's part of normal sex ed. I don't think a lesson or two, it would actually cause damage to boys.
Go on, Ella.
Well, I just don't... I mean, the idea that trial and error is traumatising is, I think, part of the problem here, because, you know, again, you're suggesting that what happens when a young man and woman of the consensual age get together and try and get it on is that boys inherently do something really, really bad, and the young woman suffers for it. In actual fact, what mostly happens is that the two of them fumble along, and maybe, you know, in the morning there are some regrets. Maybe you have a bad date or something like that, and you learn from the next one. But there's this sort of suggestion that there is a malevolence here, and in actual fact, you know, girls make mistakes, boys make mistakes, and the way we learn is, you know, about social norms is always informally. It's not through being lectured to either by your parents or by teachers. And the way in which we give boys, in particular, guidance, and girls in how to have their relationships in privacy, I think is really by being as informal about it as we can, because the more you set down rules, you know, the idea of teaching consent is such a nonsense to me, because in actual fact, the whole notion of consent is that it's flexible, it changes. You can't set down rules for it. You certainly can't sign a contract for it. It has to happen in the moment. And I think you just talked about celibacy. I mean, Christ, if I was a young person today, I'd find it very, very hard to engage in sexual relationships, because there seems to be so many tick boxes to check.
Yeah, Emily, I suppose there is the potential, is there not, for it to be skewed? Now, I suppose most teachers are women, from what I understand it, and whether or not they would necessarily always be best placed to advise boys, would it potentially come from a position of bias, maybe? I don't know. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Do you think this is really the best way that boys could learn about it? Should it not maybe just be from their own mother, potentially?
I would also very much encourage parents to speak to their children. I think if schools are having to step in, that's clearly because parents maybe aren't having those conversations. And, you know, for girls, it is the school's responsibility as well. In terms of bias, I mean, clearly it's so far the other way right now. You know, all teachers are reporting widespread sexual harassment. Girls are reporting it. If you read the testimonies on Everyone's Invited 2 years ago, there was some really harrowing stuff. And I mean, yeah, being assaulted by a young person when you're a young person is traumatizing. I really stand by that, and that is happening. Girls are speaking out about how it's happening. I don't think, but I mean, I would encourage, if you think men should have some of those conversations, male teachers, I would support that. I think, and I also think as well, that girls should have these conversations in sex ed as well and be taught how to respect boys. I'm not saying it's entirely one way, and I think it's important to be able to do it in a respectful way that encourages people to try things. Right. Of course, it's not always black and white. And I certainly don't want to put a bunch more young boys in young offenders institutions. That is like the opposite of what I want. I think it should be totally, well, almost totally non-punitive and encouraging for both sides.
All right, look, we could talk about this all day. I wish we did have a bit more time, but we're slightly overtaken by events at the top of this hour. So thank you very much, both of you, for, I hope, anyway, picking through this absolute minefield quite well. So there we go. As author Ella Whelan and the assistant editor of Prospect magazine, Emily Lawford. Right, that's been one heck of an hour, people. So Andrew Bridgen has been expelled from the Conservative Party after he compared COVID-19 vaccines with elements of the Holocaust. He's hit out at what he calls corruption in politics, and he told GB News that he's got the right to express genuine concerns about the vaccines. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, and this is Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, well, a very good evening, everybody. Patrick Christys here on GB News, and I have got a firecracker of a final hour coming your way. We start with Sudan, but I'm asking whether or not you think we have a moral obligation in this country to take in Sudanese refugees, or do we already do our bit when it comes to people from Afghanistan, frankly, all over the world, don't we? So, Suella Braverman has ruled out more safe and legal routes. Do you think that is a good thing? In other news, Andrew Bridgen, he was just on the show about an hour ago, wasn't he? Quite explosive interview that, I thought. What did you make of it if you did tune in and see it? He's been booted out of the Conservative Party for his comments in relation to the vaccine and, of course, what he said in relation to the Holocaust as well. Do you think that's fair? Do you not think that's fair? We'll be talking about all of that. And in other news as well, nurses wearing body cams. It's been suggested, and the main reason behind it is with a view of it cutting down on sexual assaults and rapes that apparently are taking place in hospitals. How would you feel, though, as a patient, to know that the nurse who's treating you at your most vulnerable moment in time does indeed have a body cam on and the whole thing is filmed? I've got all of this coming your way and much, much more, including I will be telling you why local councils are doing their best to ruin the coronation. Patrick Christys on GB News. Yes, get your emails coming in thick and fast. gbnews@gbnews.uk. I've just put a little heads up, actually. I've just seen him just over the corner of my eye there. And Nigel Farage is joining me live in the studio in just a matter of moments, so don't miss that. But first, it is your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight on GB News. The Home Secretary says there are no plans to introduce safe routes out of Sudan for refugees. The first flight carrying British nationals out of the country has landed in the UK this afternoon at Stansted. More than 300 people have so far been evacuated from the country, but it's estimated around 4,000 are still stuck there. Hundreds of people have been killed in fighting between military factions, which broke out more than a fortnight ago. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours now as the military races to rescue British people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. Asked whether the government would also help refugees, Suella Braverman said no.
We have no plans to do that. Our focus, first and foremost, right now, and bearing in mind this is a fast-moving situation and a complex situation, is to support British nationals and their dependents.
Well, Rosen Ahmed, who was forced to make her own way out of Sudan, spoke to us earlier about her journey.
It isn't easy. It isn't safe. It's a massive, massive risk to go out on the streets and drive and attempt to move in the midst of war. And it's also not cheap. It's very expensive. So it was a harrowing journey.
Rosen Ahmed speaking there. Now, within the last hour, the MP Andrew Bridgen has told GB News he's very disappointed that the Conservative Party has leaked details of his expulsion from the party. He was expelled on the 12th of April on a recommendation from a disciplinary panel. And that's after he questioned the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines and compared the government rollout to the Holocaust. Clinical trials showed all COVID vaccines were safe and effective. Mr Bridgen was given 28 days to appeal and he said he would stand again at the next election. He's hit out at what he's calling corruption and cover-ups in politics.
I barely recognise the Conservative Party at the moment. We seem to have moved away from being a party that legislates for the people to a party that legislates against the people. Surely I've got the right to free speech to express the genuine and legitimate concerns of my constituents about the safety and efficacy of experimental vaccines which were never tested properly.
International news now, and the leaders of Ukraine and China have held a telephone call for the very first time since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February last year. Chinese state media claiming President Xi Jinping told Volodymyr Zelensky he is prepared to send special representatives now to Ukraine to begin peace talks. President Xi is the most powerful world leader to have refrained from denouncing Russia's invasion of Ukraine, even making a state visit to Russia to meet President Putin last month. Since February, he's been promoting what he's calling a 12-point peace plan. Well, here at home, the Met Police Commissioner has admitted the force hasn't yet reached its recruitment target, saying they're about 1,000 officers short. More than 20,000, though. Police officers have been hired in England and Wales, but Britain's biggest police force in London has missed its individual target. The ongoing recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next decade. And the Prime Minister earlier said that although progress was good, more work was needed. Mr Rowley says the Met's shortfall is partly down to the force's current reputation.
I wish we'd hit it, but we haven't.
Why haven't you?
So I think there are a range of factors in this. We have recruited over the last 3 years more than 9,000 officers, which is the most I think ever in such a short period. We haven't hit the target. Obviously, we are striving to maintain the quality. That's really important. I think there are factors which include both. I think the reputation of the organisation at the moment doesn't help recruiting.
A man has been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the 9-year-old girl in Liverpool last summer. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman was responsible for her murder, claiming he was not aware of this when he helped him. He's been sentenced to 22 months in prison. Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny says an investigation has now been opened that could see him serve an extra 30 years in jail. Mr Navalny, who's currently serving an 11-and-a-half-year sentence in jail, is being investigated on terrorism charges he calls absurd. He survived an assassination attempt in 2020 after being poisoned. The Kremlin denies any involvement. And lastly, new data reveals the average cost of annual car insurance is now £107 more expensive than it was a year ago. The research from one poll found that the average price of a policy taken out in the first 3 months of this year was £637. That's the highest since they peaked in 2011. On average, those surveyed were charged £53 more for their renewal price on an existing policy. You're with GB News. I'm back in half an hour with more. See you then.
Let's start now with a big day in the battle to get the migrant crisis under control. So the illegal migration bill is being debated in the House of Commons, and the Home Secretary has said that migrants arriving on small boats have values, quote, at odds with British norms, with links to heightened levels of criminality. Cue mass hysteria. Suella Braverman made the comments as her legislation aimed at deterring people reaching UK shores illegally faced its final hurdle in the Commons today. And ministers will vote on amendments to the illegal migration bill this very evening. If approved, those who arrive illegally via the English Channel will be detained, then either sent home or to a safe third country, such as Rwanda. I am joined now by the man himself, is Mr Nigel Farage. Nigel, thank you very, very much. First things first, what do you make of her comments? Heightened levels of criminality, odds, values at odds with our own.
Gosh, I can't think who was saying this a couple of years ago, can you? And being absolutely condemned for daring to suggest such a thing. I mean, you know, what I was clearly espousing was a really vicious form of racism and bigotry and division. I'm delighted that the language has moved on. I'm delighted we've got a Home Secretary with the courage to call it how it is. I mean, on criminality, I mean, the evidence, it's there on TikTok. You can actually see the gangs on TikTok showing individuals coming into the country, joining drug gangs, and there they are, you know, with thousands and thousands of pounds. So there's no doubt that a lot, well, the whole thing's criminal, isn't it? It's the criminal gangs that bring them in, and many of them do join, you know, criminal networks once they're here. Doesn't mean everybody, no one's saying that. And the values at odds thing, well, I thought Robert Jenrick's comments yesterday were also very, very strong on this. Yeah. Look, you know, it's a known fact that if you put a very large number of young males who come from countries in which women aren't even second-class citizens, don't be surprised.
Well, it's not just that, is it? I mean, it's, you know, the LGBTQ community. I don't think they're particularly large in a lot of Middle Eastern countries, and I don't imagine that they would do particularly well in Afghanistan, for example, and then at the same time we're expected that a lot of people would come over here and integrate perfectly in our modern way of life.
If you said a word on this programme that was interpreted by the LGBT community to be prejudiced or biased against them, they'd be hell to pay, Patrick, for you. Complaints to Ofcom, goodness knows what else. Yet, if groups come in here whose attitudes towards homosexuality are frankly violent, you know, not to put too fine a point, and they don't say a word, it's quite extraordinary. Look, here's the thing. Here's the thing. Whether it's through genuine sincerity or whether it's through electoral pressure, the government have realised over the course of the last year that this issue could cost them the red wall.
Yeah.
So they've toughened up the rhetoric. They're toughening up the legislation. But at the same time, when concerns get raised about the lack of compatibility with the principles enshrined within the ECHR, Suella basically admits that it's not compatible, does it very gently, and Rishi Sunak says there are no circumstances under which we're going to leave ECHR. And so my guess is that the game they're playing is to say to the British public, hey, you know what? We think the same as 70% of you. Like you, we're prepared to speak out on your behalf. But these terrible, horrible foreign judges are stopping us making our own decisions. This is Brexit times two. The same arguments as EU members. Well, we tried our best.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid Brussels wouldn't let us. So, frankly, I think what will happen is this will fail completely. They won't stop the votes. They'll they'll up the ante on the rhetoric, and they'll fight the next election on an ECHR issue.
So just on this illegal migration bill right now, I've just had some comments from Theresa May come through here, which I'll put to you. I would say, this is Theresa May, I would say this is a slap in the face to those of us who actually care about the victims of modern slavery. It also suggests that those dealing with this bill simply do not understand the nature of these crimes. So what do you make of her saying that any bid to I suppose, lessen the impacts of modern slavery, people being able to claim being victims of modern slavery, is a slap in the face to the genuine victims?
Well, I mean, that legislation that she passed in 2015, frankly, has been used and abused by people from Albania, and you wait, there'll be Indians, young Indians, who've been coming this year who'll do the same. She's given people a lever that they can use to claim asylum from countries where you should not be allowed to claim asylum. You know, they'll come in, they'll claim their traffic, they'll use her legislation. So, you know, frankly, she's about the last person on earth I'm going to listen to on this.
OK, look, Nigel, thank you very much. And just a quick throw ahead, you'll be on later, won't you? What do you got coming up?
Well, we'll have the votes, so we'll see whether there is a rebellion within the Conservative Party. We know that, you know, Robert Buckland and people like this are saying, oh, well, you know, this must not apply to minors, by which he means people who claim to be 17 but are 42, I think. No, there will be some children in there. So we'll look at the impact of the vote. I've no doubt that it'll sail through. There'll be half a dozen abstentions. We'll talk about this. I'm also really interested in the fact that, you know, if people now, rich visitors that used to come to London and shop in Bond Street, are more likely to go to Paris or Rome to do so now, because, isn't it funny? We left the European Union to get more economic freedom, and yet the EU is still VAT for outside shoppers, and yet we've put VAT back on.
Continue to commit national acts of deliberate self-harm.
Yeah, and Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, whatever you think of that budget, they were on the right track with this. And I was applauding this at the time, because I'd talked about it in the previous couple of years. And Jeremy Hunt appears to be implacable. Having said that, the Daily Mail campaign that they're running, now with 100 major companies in support, I think this is just plain common sense. There is a counter-argument, though, which says, hey, you know what, Patrick, you go and buy a wedding ring and you've got to pay 20% VAT, so why should you have to pay the VAT when some wealthy person from Dubai can come and pay the same?
Well, when you put it like that, you know.
So there is... No, but there is a debate here. There is a debate here, but it's still an act of self-harm.
Good stuff, Nigel. Great stuff. Thank you very, very much. Nigel Farage will be on your screens in, well, what about an hour and 45 minutes? So there we go. Right now, joining me is Conservative MP Tim Loughton as well. Great stuff, I believe. There we go, Tim. How are you, first and foremost?
Pretty stressed. It's been a busy day, but...
OK, right, so where are you on this, then? So I understand... Just go on, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but are you hoping to soften this bill, are you? Tim, have you got me, Tim?
Yep, you kept freezing. Can you hear me now?
Oh, sorry. Are you hoping to soften this illegal migration bill, are you? Are you concerned about the impact it might have on children, is that right?
I don't want to soften this illegal migration bill. I want to get a proper balance. We need to have some really tough measures in it to crack down on the people smugglers and those non-genuine asylum seekers who are gaming the system. In order to give a balance to that, you need to make sure we have got proper, safe and legal routes to genuine asylum seekers to whom traditionally this country has given a duty of care. And I'm particularly concerned about children because as it stands, we could be locking up children for extended periods. And that completely contravenes the Children's Act. So I want some balance in this. And I've had some assurances from the Minister today that they'll bring forward further measures when the bill goes to the House of Lords.
How do we get that right, Tim? How do we, in turn, balance that with the idea, well, the reality, really, that there are adults who are posing as children who, in turn, pose a threat? So how do we marry those two things up? Not without some form of, I suppose, medical intervention or test to definitively say that this person is a child, maybe?
Well, the bill now includes measures to bring forward age verification tests, and if people don't agree to have them, then it will completely undermine their claim to be a child. And what I'm really worried about as well is mixing up adults with genuine children. There are safeguarding issues there. So I want to make sure that genuine children who are clearly children are in an appropriate place under whatever detention for as short a period as possible whilst their claims are processed, and whether they should then end up in a proper placement in this country or not. For those, and it's about half of people who masquerade as children and turn out not to be, we're probably going to have some greater safeguards around that. But the whole lot needs to be speeded up. The problem is it's taking far too long to process people's claims in this country anyway. So there's a lot of work still to do from the government. We've got some assurances from the Immigration Minister today, but they're going to have to translate into solid, hard, detailed recommendations in the bill when it goes to the House of Lords. But at the moment, I'm relatively satisfied. And look, I want this bill to succeed. I want us to clamp down on these people who are trading in human misery, but we've got to make sure we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and make sure we can still have a lifeline to genuine asylum seekers and particularly unaccompanied children escaping from places of danger.
Is there a concern, like we're seeing now, apparently new reports suggest that the Indians have overtaken Albanians as the second largest cohort of people coming across the Channel? India, let's be honest, is a relatively safe country, certainly not an out-and-out war zone. And is there a concern that the UK has already become a sponge for the world's problems, do you think?
Look, I don't like to use the word sponge, but we cannot be a refugee camp for the whole of the world. So we've got to make sure that we are taking people who are genuinely fleeing danger, who have a legitimate claim to come to the UK, primarily because they've got a relation here and they're orphaned or whatever it may be. So we still need to make sure we've got strict thresholds for people coming to this country. I don't understand the Indian phenomena because we take an awful lot of people from India legally, and obviously there are many family links. So we need to absolutely clamp down on that if that is being abused as well. The Albanian numbers have gone down drastically. Last year, they were 28% of all those applying, but it may well go up again because it is seasonal, and we've seen that happen in the past. I'm not particularly concerned about what the ultimate numbers are. What I'm concerned about is that we take genuine asylum seekers in a sustainable and orderly way where we can offer them homes. We've still got 9,000 legal Afghani people we airlifted back in the summer of 21 in hotels here, which just shows the problem we've got being able to provide proper accommodation. So we need to do it in a sustainable way that's fair to our taxpayers, fair to people who need to use hotels, but genuinely offers safety to genuine asylum seekers of whom we can take a limited number.
All right, look, Tim, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. Tim Larson there is a Conservative MP, just filling you in on this illegal migration bill. Make sure you stay tuned for GB News because we will be bringing you the votes on that, the verdict, as it were, later on tonight. Expected to go through. A few abstentions here, there and everywhere, but I'm sure it will, well, not sure, almost sure, it will go through. So there we go. Look, we'll have a debate a little later on in this hour, actually, whether we have a moral responsibility to take refugees from Sudan. But now to Andrew Bridgen, who's been kicked out of the Conservative Party after he compared the COVID-19 vaccines to, as large a scale, the biggest humanitarian disaster since the Holocaust. Now, I spoke to him earlier on. Bridgen was also found to have breached lobbying rules by a disciplinary panel. He says that he's been expelled from the party, quotes, under false pretences.
Very disappointed that the party have leaked this out. As I understand it, confidentiality was required for me to be able to appeal against the unwarranted expulsion from the Conservative Party. I think it's completely spurious. And I've issued a rebuttal document now to the public, which I sent to CCHQ some days ago. I couldn't even get them to respond, despite repeated requests for them to confirm they'd received it. Nothing back from various emails at CCHQ. I do recall that over the so-called offensive tweet, I was suspended within an hour or so. I don't know how they respond to complaints when they never respond to my complaints. Well, that's incorrect. The tweet in question, I was retweeting a world-leading cardiologist and a paper from a criminology doctorate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the quote I retweeted from the cardiologist was that the vaccine rollout was the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. That is neither denying the Holocaust or belittling the Holocaust. It's using the Holocaust as a moment in time and saying that the rollout of the vaccines is the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust.
Yeah, I would urge you to go and have a look at that interview in full, actually, online. It'll be available on our social media at GB News. You can also check it out on YouTube as well. It was quite wide-ranging, really. He also went on to say rather a lot about the current state of the Conservative Party and how he felt the party was doing going forward and whether or not there was a bit of a concerted attempt, in his view, to maybe oust some stalwarts, I suppose, of the Tory party. Look, Andrew, of course, made a lot of claims about the COVID-19 vaccine during that interview with me, and he said that he has the right to freedom of speech, which of course he does, and to express genuine and legitimate concerns about the vaccine. And I certainly have absolutely no issues with him doing that at all. The NHS website says COVID-19 vaccination is safe and effective. It gives you the best protection against COVID-19. Andrew Bridgen, of course, and indeed quite a few other people would make other claims. So there we go. After a shocking report now, moving on, a shocking report now into the number of sexual assaults in hospitals. Should nurses wear body cameras? So picture yourself, you're in hospital, you're a patient, you're most vulnerable, you're most stressed out, nurse comes in and she's filming the whole thing. How do you feel about that? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
OK, loads more coming your way, but we start now with nurses wearing, potentially, body cameras. After a report uncovered a shocking number of rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals, more than 6,500 offences took place in less than 4 years up to last October. But it got me thinking, OK, I completely understand all of this, and that is terrible, and if it brings safety to the nurses, or perceived safety to the nurses, great thing. But what about the patients as well? If you're lying there in your hour of need and, you know, you're already a bit all over the place and in a lot of pain, how do you feel about maybe your human rights? Do you consent, really, to be filmed in that specific situation? Let's just go through some of the findings of this report, which is from the Women's Rights Network. So, there were a total of 6,539 rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals between January 2019 and October 2022. 1,021 of those offences took place on hospital wards. 265 people were charged, which is just 4.1%. So not all police forces responded to this Freedom of Information request, and the Women's Rights Network point out that these crimes are often underreported, so basically they think the actual number of crimes is probably a lot higher. Joining me now is Heather Binning, who is from the Women's Rights Network themselves. Great stuff. Thank you very much, Heather. Great to have you on the show. Right, should nurses wear body cameras?
Well, if that's a yes and no question right now, I would say no. Having been in hospital myself, taken drugs, well, you know, prescribed drugs, of course, in a very vulnerable position, you can't consent to somebody coming in and filming you in that position. However, I think it's a lot more nuanced than that, and this came out of conversations that had taken place in government at the highest level, and talking about what were they going to do following the release of our report and these awful numbers. And it was mentioned, the idea of body cams, I think, was mentioned as a possible solution. I am happy that they're looking at all possible solutions to this problem. I don't want them to discount anything immediately. And it may be that body cams have a role to play, for instance, in a very busy A&E on a Friday or Saturday night. However, I do want proper consideration to be given to these issues, because there is, and body cams can be turned off. They can be used. What are the purpose of them? Is it to protect the nurses? Is it to protect patients? Because we need to understand better what the problem is, why these numbers are so high, and where these incidents are occurring before we can actually come up with the right solution to the problem.
Yeah, no, indeed. I mean, first things first, I was absolutely shocked to see the reports of sexual assault and rape from within our hospitals. I must say that was what really initially stood out to me about this. I was like, good grief. I mean, I was shocked by it. And so there is that. So clearly something needs to be done about that. And I'm just not sure, mainly because of the actual human rights of the patient. As you've said, you're in a vulnerable situation, whether or not body cameras really is the actual answer to it. And I think it might even put some people off potentially getting some treatment. But, I mean, if that isn't the solution, then what do you think it is? Because clearly what has to stop is the sexual assaults and rapes in hospitals.
Yes. Well, as I said, the first thing needs to be explored is exactly where these things are occurring, who the alleged perpetrators are, who the victims are. We don't know. We know that 1,000 of these incidents took place on the hospital ward. And so we can, we are presuming therefore that is inpatients. We don't know where the others are taking place or the scale of them and who the alleged perpetrators are. So we need to find out that anecdotally, we've had a lot of women coming forward that have been telling us stories about, their own stories about situations and what has happened to them. And there are a number of key issues, I think. And I think one is we need to look at what is happening with mental health patients. We understand that they're in hospital for illness and then maybe stay in hospital longer than they should because the second stage, the next stage can't be found and located for them. So is that part of the problem? I think the biggest problem, if you want to make one change right now, would be to absolutely ensure that there are single-sex accommodation provided in hospitals. In 2010, the government made a commitment to provide single-sex spaces. And there's a document outlining that. However, there's an Annex B to that document that is allowing self-identifying
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, this is another big one. This is absolutely another big one, and unfortunately, that is a problem that I suspect is only going to get worse and not better anytime soon. And so you've got just the fact that you've alluded to there, which is mental health patients. You've got all of the existing present dangers, and then we might be about to we are introducing additional ones into there, which I think is going to have a catastrophic impact. But thank you very much, Heather. I wish I could talk to you all day, but we are out of time for now. But I hope to chat to you again very soon. There's Heather Binning there, who's from the Women's Rights Network, just reacting to, yes, firstly, the amount of sexual assaults taking place in hospitals, but the fact that the solution to that might be to put a body camera on a nurse, and whether or not really, as a patient, that's all right with you. Do you consent to that? I've got loads more coming between now and 6 o'clock. The first plane taking British citizens back from Sudan has landed in the UK, but I'm going to broaden this out and ask, have we got a moral responsibility to take in refugees from the African country? I'm going to nail my colours to the mast here and say, no, I think we already do enough. But if you've got a different view, then let me know. We'll have a debate on that. And after a fatal crash involving a mobility scooter, I will ask, should people have to pass a test to be allowed to drive a mobility scooter? What do you make of all of that, ladies and gentlemen? Oh, and yes, also, I will be telling you why some councils, miserable councils, want to ruin your coronation. Spoiler alert, it involves planning permission and a picnic, so who'd have thunk it? Anyway, Polly Middlehurst now with your headlines.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Our top story on GB News this hour. The Home Secretary is saying there are no plans to create safe routes out of Sudan for any refugees. The first flight carrying British nationals out of Sudan, though, has landed in the UK. More than 300 people evacuated from the country so far. It's estimated 4,000 people are stuck there. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting between military factions broke out more than a fortnight ago. The Prime Minister has warned of a critical 24 hours ahead as the military races to rescue people before the 72-hour ceasefire ends. The MP Andrew Bridgen has told GB News he's very disappointed the Conservative Party has leaked details of his expulsion. He was expelled from the party on the 12th of April on a recommendation from a disciplinary panel. That's after he retweeted the comments of a doctor who'd questioned the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines and compared them to the Holocaust. Clinical trials have shown COVID vaccines are effective and safe. Mr Bridgen was given 28 days to appeal and he said he'll stand again at the next election. A man's been jailed for assisting 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell's murderer. 41-year-old Paul Russell pleaded guilty to driving Thomas Cashman after he'd fatally shot the 9-year-old in Liverpool last summer. He told police in the days after Olivia's death that Cashman had been responsible for her murder, claiming he hadn't been aware of the shooting when he helped him. He's been sentenced to 22 months in prison. Those are your latest news headlines. I'm back with the main news at 6 o'clock. See you then.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
First, a quick snapshot of the markets for you. The pound buying you $1.2477 and €1.1293. The price of gold is £1,598.98 an ounce, and the FTSE 100 closing today at 7,854 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Right, OK, let's get more on the top story of our news bulletin, which is the Home Secretary says that there's no plans to create safe and legal routes for refugees trying to escape the conflict in Sudan. So resettlement schemes have previously been set up for refugees fleeing Ukraine and Afghanistan, and a lot of people would say that we had more of a duty to those people. We invaded Afghanistan for a start, and Ukraine, we helped convince them to get rid of their nuclear weapons. Putin rolls the tanks in. We all know the story there. But should Britain always open its doors to people trying to escape their home countries in the midst of a conflict? Or, put simply, does Britain risk becoming a sponge or a dumping ground for the world's problems? Do we have a moral obligation for the general population of Sudan? Not just British citizens, the general population. Let's get the views now of Refugee and Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International UK, Steve Valdez-Simmons, and Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe. Stephen, I will start with you. Do we have a moral obligation to the people of Sudan, all of them, not just British citizens who want to come here and seek asylum?
Well, I'm going to sound strange for me to say this, but to an extent, yes, Patrick, because we have a moral responsibility because we've signed the UN Convention on Refugees to help those who are fleeing persecution, torture, and in these cases we've got war. And to an extent here, you have a perfect example of the people of Sudan being almost identical to the people of Ukraine. The question is, how do we enable it? With Ukraine, it was much more easily attainable. And with Sudan, it's a question also whether we can work with the United Nations and other countries to try and help what happens. We've done it in the past in other countries, but will we be able to take the numbers, and can we do so with every country? I think in the end we'll see people leaving Sudan and taking the routes that others have done across the Channel.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at, really. Steve, I'll bring you in now. Steve Valdez-Simmons, who is, of course, of Amnesty International UK. Now, where do we draw the line as a country? I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of conflict in the world. Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who feel as though they can't continue to live where they do live. I mean, what's also true is that it appears that a lot of them are desperate to come to the UK. At what point do we become just a sponge for the world's problems?
I think we should get a bit in perspective about this. I agree very much with what Stephen has just said. Clearly, it is a global responsibility to protect refugees. That is what we signed up for. And we asked the rest of the world to sign up for. And essentially, the rest of the world has done so too. And so while we expect other countries to provide safety to Sudanese, to Ukrainian, Afghan, and many other refugees, so should we. And the more we cooperate with others to provide that safety, the less people will be forced onto dangerous journeys, and the less people or fewer people there will be from whom smugglers and even worse, human traffickers profit. But if we turn our backs on our international obligations, we can only expect that other countries will do the same. And there will be more people making dangerous journeys, such as do make dangerous journeys across the Channel.
OK, Stephen Wolfe, what would you say to people who would say we've done enough? We've got British citizens out of there. That's enough now.
Well, I think it's right for us to say that we are doing a lot, and we have done. I mean, our research shows that since the year 2000, we've accepted over 1 million asylum applications into the United Kingdom, and nearly 1.1 million have had decisions made since that time. So the country is doing a great deal. Add that to our programs with Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine, and Hong Kong, and it's clear that this country is doing a huge amount. The big issue that we should be addressing all the time, and it's the reason why we have the illegal migration bill going through, is because we're not alone. The UN accepts it, the European Union accepts it, that in the mass movement of people across the globe, there is an increasing number of those who are not genuine refugees, as we saw in Ukraine and Sudan, but there are those who are economic migrants.
There is that side of it. And Steve Alder-Simmons, I'll bring you in here now. If we hadn't have been such a soft touch with a load of unquestionably economic migrants who are coming over here and abusing our system, maybe we would have more room for genuine people fleeing war in places like Sudan. Your response?
Well, I think, again, we need to have some perspective. This country does not see a disproportionate number of people seeking asylum compared to its European neighbours or compared to many countries elsewhere. And if we are to be true to our shared responsibility to provide refugee protection, then we too need to acknowledge that we have to have an asylum system dealing with the people who arrive and make their claims. That will mean handling the claims of some people whose claims will not be well-founded, and therefore having the responsibilities of seeking to return them to their home countries, just as we expect the French and the Germans and other countries to do the same. If we simply just rip up our obligations and say, no, we will not have any of them. And by the way, we haven't seen an increasing number or proportion of people with bad claims. If anything, we have seen exactly the opposite.
Yeah, but Steve, you and I both know that the main reason behind that is because we're not processing them quickly enough. So it's very hard for us to tell, actually. Look, Steve Alder-Simmons, I'll throw it to you before I give the final word to Mr. Wolf. It's difficult with two Steves, actually, but there we go. Look, some of the only building and the only planning applications that seem to be accepted at the moment appear to be those that involve asylum detention centres and all of this stuff. I mean, at what point, Steve, do we maybe look at the current international obligations that we've got at the moment and say they were not designed for the current international outlook, and therefore we have to change them? Because at what cost, Steve? If we keep throwing our arms around the world, at what cost?
Just two things in response to that. The people who are, or the countries who are, and have been for decades, taking the huge share of responsibility for refugees under this convention are nowhere near our vicinity, let alone us. And if we want to rewrite those laws and rebalance this, that means us taking more responsibility. If we're concerned about the cost of our asylum system, we only need to look at the government and ask why it has, over the last 4 years, refused to process so many claims. That is why we have a huge backlog. That is why our system has fallen apart.
OK. Stephen Wolf, final word to you. Look, do you expect, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of people claiming to at least be from Sudan? Is this going to be the next wave that we're going to end up with people coming across the channel, do you think?
Well, I think there are going to be some. I really honestly can't see the numbers because we've already expected 65,000 this year. There is a massive cost to the budget. It's around 4 billion will be what we spend on migration and asylum this year through the Home Office budget and others. So we really do need to look at the way that we deal with it. I may disagree with Stephen in terms of the rising numbers. There are some countries like Iraq and Iranians where we just grant them discretionary protection rather than under the UN Refugee Convention or the ECHR, simply because the government knows that it can't return them, and we give them much more bail as well applications for those particular two countries. And it's irredeemably accepted internationally that there is a rise in what's called economic migrancy. And so my argument is that we do need to have a new international review, a conference discussing how we move forward in the 21st century in order to look at the problems globally. And that needs to be refreshed by all countries involved.
OK, good stuff, both of you. Thank you very much. As Refugee and Asylum Rights Director, Amnesty International UK, Steve Alder-Simmons, and then Director at the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolf. Two people with very long business cards there, both ironically with the same name. Anyway, right, now, I'm going to delve into the inbox quickly. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Lots of support for Andrew Bridgen, it must be said. He was on earlier. Can I just urge you, go and have a look at our Twitter, go and have a look at our YouTube. There was a very long and wide-ranging interview, I think, with Andrew Bridgen earlier on. He has now been expelled from the Conservative Party. He is absolutely adamant that he didn't really do anything wrong and that there's some kind of witch hunt, it exposes corruption, and that it's a scandal, really, that he's been booted out for what he would say is freedom of speech in relation to the coronavirus vaccines. He said a lot. He said he's going to stand again. Anyway, let me know what you make of that interview. But a lot of people getting involved here, saying that he's speaking up for the rights of people who sadly don't have them anymore, including Janet, who's just been on to say, look, she claims anyway to know people who have passed away as a result of the coronavirus vaccine. And Andrew Bridgen is one of the few people, she says, who is willing to stick his head above the parapet. All power to him. So that's Janet's view there. There's quite a lot of similar emails, it must be said, coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, moving on to something completely different. Should people have to pass a driving test to be able to use a mobility scooter? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen. Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories. Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, look, I thought why not finish with something a little bit different. This caught my eye in the news agenda this morning. Mobility scooter users are to be encouraged to take a test to ensure that they are safe drivers. It comes after a coroner warned of the dangers posed by unlicensed operators. A 92-year-old woman was sadly killed last year after she was hit by a scooter. Transport Secretary Mark Harper says that he supports a nationwide assessment and training scheme which is expected to launch next year. But I can speak now to Neil Gregg, who is the Director of Policy and Research at I Am Road Smart. Now, look, Neil, do we really need to be giving disabled people, and let's be honest with you, golden oldies, a driving test to get on a mobility scooter? Can't we all look out for them instead?
Well, you would hope so, but unfortunately, we're actually seeing a big increase in deaths and serious injuries. 8 deaths in 2021, 36 serious injuries, 300 injuries overall involving mobility scooters. Most of those were to the mobility scooter users themselves. But the trouble is, these days you can get a mobility scooter online, delivered tomorrow, with no instruction on how to use it, no training on how to use it, and the numbers have just taken off. There's hundreds of thousands of these things now, and I think we're looking at a time now where we do need to be looking at a bit more regulation to make sure they're being used safely, and they're keeping everybody safe, the users and the pedestrians and the cyclists around them as well.
Oh, look, come on. How bad is it? I mean, cyclists, they're not even going to be having number plates on their backs. They resist all of that. You don't have to go, I don't think you have to take any kind of test, do you, to get on a bike? I mean, I don't mind admitting, I actually can't ride a bike. But technically, I could go outside now and get on one and be on the roads around London. I would be unsafe. What about, the poor person who can't walk to the shop? Surely they can just get on the mobility scooter and nip down to Tesco's.
Well, we're not talking about a driving test like you would give to a 17-year-old here. We're talking about a quick assessment, something that shows that they know how to operate the mobility scooter, and also that they know the rules. And the rules are quite complicated. There are several different types of mobility scooters. There are some that are only allowed on the pavement. There are some that you can go on to roads up to 50 miles per hour limits on, and they're limited to 8 miles per hour. So you've got somebody on a mobility scooter doing 8 miles per hour on a road where the rest of the traffic might be doing 50 miles per hour. And that is clearly a recipe for danger. There's actually a whole section in the highway code for mobility scooter users, and there's one or two people around the country, the more responsible retailers, some police forces have done some training of their own, but it's all entirely voluntary. And I think as we carry on seeing these numbers going up, we do need to be looking seriously at how we're going to try and keep people as safe as possible, because it seems that the numbers of people moving on to mobility scooters, they've almost become the rite of passage. You give up driving, but you can still have a mobility scooter. And they do give a lot of independence, a lot of quality of life, but you have to use them safely.
OK, all right. Well, look, Neil, thank you very, very much. And it's been interesting to get your insight into it. Hopefully we don't over-regulate the oldies. That's what my concern would be. They need all this, as much freedom as they can possibly get. It's Neil Greig there, who's the Director of Policy and Research at I Am Road Smart. I just thought I'd finish with that one. It's something a little bit different, isn't it? But it might affect a lot of you, who knows? I certainly think one would be an absolute nightmare on a mobility scooter. Certainly if my experience is in a golf buggy or anything to go by, I'm not allowed back there. Right, it's time now for Patrick's Pick of the Day, where I focus on a story that isn't the biggest one of the day, but I wanted to talk about it nonetheless. As usual, Just Stop Oil protesters have been making a nuisance of themselves on the streets of London, but this one absolutely got me. You've got a driver here, so this is a working man on his way to work, and you can't hear it now, but what he's saying to them is, get out the flipping road, you bunch of orange numpties, get rid of this sign, and the police officers go up to him, the worker, say, no, sir, you can't do that. And in the end, they give the sign back to Just Stop Oil. Are you joking? Whose side are these people on? The police officers. So you're telling me that it's all right to stand into a road, block someone there. What if someone that he knew was having a heart attack in the back of that car and he wouldn't have been able to get to hospital? 2 police officers there, 3 now. How many more does it take to stop a man getting to work? Shepherding him back in the car. Oh, sir, you can't possibly touch these protesters who are making your day an absolute living hell. No, we couldn't have that, could we? And then, and then all of a sudden this guy's treated like the criminal. And you've got a load of people there who just unemployed layabouts, just blocking people from getting to work. It really does hammer home, doesn't it? Anyway, in case you couldn't tell, the reason I wanted to play that video is because it made me very angry. So there we are. Well, then my tie's a bit Just Stop Oil today, isn't it? Anyway, Jubes is here with me now. Michelle Dewberry.
Hello, right? I am all right. I was chuckling. I don't know what you was talking about, so it might have been something very serious when you was talking about mobility scooters. So if it was a serious topic,
not really.
My mum's husband, pretty much he is, he got hit. He'll be cringing if he's watching this. He got hit by a mobility scooter and it caused him some proper serious damage, so it did. And we all found it absolutely hilarious because it wasn't going very fast at all. So I don't know how he managed to get hit by it, but they can be lethal, those things.
They can be. Yeah, they can be. I just think we shouldn't curtail the golden oldies. You need to get out and about. Did you hear Andrew Bridgen earlier? He was on my show.
Yes, I was definitely listening intently.
What do you make of that situation?
What, the whole kind of comparison to the Holocaust and all the rest of it, you mean? Or him...
Him getting booted out more than that. I think, him getting booted out.
Oh, you know, that is one of those topics, isn't it? If you dare say anything derogatory about side effects of the vaccine, you will be silenced quicker than a quick thing from Quickland, isn't it? And actually, they don't seem to have those same standards with a lot of the other goings-on in Parliament, do they? And I think that's double standards for some is what people are not happy about. But I have to say, though, when it comes to people that have had their lives impacted by the COVID vaccines, we were one of the earlier, you know, we used to talk to those people when everyone else used to turn a blind eye. I have seen a bit more mainstream media attention given to those guys.
Sorry for him, really, in a lot of respects, but I just think the language is clumsy, isn't it? And, you know, but anyway, right, I haven't had time to ask you what you got coming up, I'm afraid. People are going to
always say to you, Patrick.
Tune in to find out.
Hey, let me quickly ask everyone.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. It is going to turn warmer as we head towards the weekend, but there will be some wet weather around as well. Some bright spells and some heavy showers through the weekend. At the moment, we've got weather fronts trying to push in from the southwest. They will eventually bring the milder air, but it's still pretty chilly out there today. A lot of cloud around. Most places dry, just the odd scattered shower over northern England, southern Scotland this evening, and still some wintry showers in Shetland where the cold air persists. But elsewhere, well, it will be a little bit milder than recent nights. Some clear spells, but generally quite cloudy, and some rain moving into Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland by dawn. Still a frost likely in northern Scotland, but elsewhere we'll dip down into the low single figures perhaps. But we should have some brightness on Thursday morning, bit of sunshine across parts of northern England, eastern England as well. But generally another cloudy day. Wet weather moving across Scotland with snow on the tops of the mountains. Turning dry through the central belts and largely dry in Northern Ireland. But look at this wet weather coming in from the southwest. Some uncertainty about the timing of that rain, but we will see some heavier bursts coming in from the southwest. Temperatures getting into the teens, but still pretty cool for the time of year. Obviously feeling cooler as this rain moves in. As I said, some uncertainty about the extent, how far north it reaches, but most places can expect to get wet during Thursday evening and overnight into Friday. You can see it's actually a swirl. It's actually developing into an area of low pressure. That should be edging away during Friday, so perhaps a grey and certainly a damp start in parts of the east, but should be drying up through the day, and certainly many western areas looking brighter on Friday with some sunshine returning, and temperatures will be on the rise with a bit of sunshine, 17, 18, perhaps a little bit higher in a few places, warming up as we head towards the weekend.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith.
Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day.
I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on